Even with officer underreporting, the data shows that over 24% of NST stops reviewed by the monitor are unlawful. Nearly everyone stopped is Black and Latino. I'm going to wrap up in a minute. And supervisors routinely approve bad stops by NST officers. Lastly, officers are rarely disciplined for unconstitutional stop and frisk, even when substantiated by the CCRB, as we heard Public Advocate Williams speak to. In September, the court published a comprehensive report that highlights these severe issues. For example, the current NYPD discipline matrix only recommends 3-day lost vacation time as a penalty for an illegal stop, frisk, or search of a person, yet even this level of discipline is a rarity, as supervisors and police commissioners regularly excuse illegal stop, frisk, and searches of New Yorkers. Unconstitutional stop, question, and frisk are still a problem in New York City. The NYPD continues to stop thousands of New Yorkers, racial disparities have worsened, and much more must be done to ensure police accountability and true community safety. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Sammy Feliz, and I am the brother of Alan Feliz, who was unjustly stopped in his car and murdered by NYPD in 2019. I am also a member of Justice Committee, an organization that works with families whose loved ones were killed by police. I am also a New Yorker who was regularly stopped because of my appearance and the color of my skin. I think that you guys know Alan's story. After Lieutenant Rivera climbed into Alan's car, beat, tased, threatened to kill, and shot Alan at close range, Officer Barrett dragged Alan out of the car, exposing his genitals. Rather than covering him up, the NYPD let him to bleed out in the street, cuffed and exposed. Lieutenant Rivera recently faced a discipline trial, and my family continues to fight to ensure that Commissioner Tisch fires him for murdering my brother. Alan was killed during a car stop, which is not the focus of this hearing, but at the same disregard for human life and dignity the NYPD showed for Alan is evident in their pedestrian stop practices. When I testified at the first How Many Stops Act hearing, I shared that under Eric Adams, the NYPD's abusive stop practices were getting worse in my neighborhood of Washington Heights. Now, a year and a half later, things are even worse. This past July, I was just walking out of my home carrying a satchel, which I usually have with me. Officers suddenly jumped out of their car and demanded to know if I had any weapons on me. When officers jump like that and tell you that they think that you have weapons, what goes through your mind is that this could be the end of my life. They found a hairbrush inside of my bag, which they said it was a bulge, that they thought it was a gun. I'm lucky that the incident ended there, but I no longer carry the hairbrush, and as you can see, I no longer carry that bag. As someone who knows all my neighbors and works to make my community safer, I hear stories like mine all the time. Over the past several months, people have told me about being followed down the street by officers and who they see interacting with, just to see who they interact with. When they shake hands with a friend or offer somebody $1 just to lend some need, or to lend some help to somebody in need, officers roll up and start questioning them. Others have shared about how they're just sitting out in front of their stoops of their building, maybe smoking a cigarette, a joint, which is totally legal, but continue to get harassed by officers demanding IDs and explanations on why they're there and why their presence is there. And some of these encounters have escalated to unjust arrests, and community members I know have filed complaints with the CCRB. Most of these incidents involve officers with khaki pants, the so-called community response cops. To me, they're just community robocops. It's absurd to call them a community team when their actions only harm the community. Thanks to the How Many Stops Acts, we know now that in spite of Black and Latin New Yorkers making up about 73% of the population in Washington Heights, they made up to 85% of those target 1 level stops, and 97 of those target level 2 stops last quarter. The data shows us that these kinds of racial disparities exist across the city, and we need the NYPD to provide us the raw data so that we can further understand the rationale behind these stops and address these discriminatory impacts. Some think that these so-called low-level stops are just minor inconveniences, but when it happens to you all the time, and you're consistently hearing about what's happening to your neighbors, and when you know that the worst-case scenario is that it can escalate to a loss of life, it causes constant fear and anxiety, and that's what my community feels. So thank you, Chairman Salam, and the whole Public Safety Committee for holding this hearing and paying attention to what is happening in our communities. This issue is deeply important to me and other families whose loved ones have been lost by the police, because we want to make sure that no other family joins this club that nobody wants to be in. We appreciate your partnership on these issues so far, and we ask that you continue to partner with us in the new year, especially because the NYPD's abuse is only going to increase under Trump's and at least another year under Adams. Lastly, my family would like to call on you to help us to ensure that Commissioner Tisch and Mayor Adams hold and fire Lieutenant Rivera for murdering my brother. The NYPD's violence and abuse must end, and it starts with meaningful accountability and systematic change. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Babe Howell, a member of the Grassroots Advocates for Neighborhood Groups and Solutions, the Gangs Coalition. Our coalition includes young people, their parents, those who represent young people, those who work with them through community-based organizations, and organizations striving to protect their civil rights. We focus on the policing of our city's vulnerable children and young adults, and the impact this has on their safety and the safety of their communities. Thank you, Chair Salam and the Committee on Public Safety for holding this hearing on stop and frisk and other investigative encounters. To begin with, how does gang policing relate to stop and frisk? Two ways. First, gang policing is, in New York, a cynical end run around the historic ruling that the NYPD's misuse of stop and frisk violates both the Fourth Amendment and equal protection. The NYPD announced Operation Crew Cut in response to the stop and frisk litigation at a time when crime was at historic lows in New York City and gang crime accounted for a minuscule amount of the crime in New York. Operation Crew Cut gave a new name to policing based on appearance and location. The second connection, critical for today's hearing, is that once labeled a gang member by the NYPD in their database, young people are targeted for and vulnerable in stop and frisk and investigative encounters. A bit of background on the NYPD's gang policing before I go on to stop and frisk. The NYPD's gang definition requires only 3 or more individuals. There are 500 gangs in the gang database, averaging about 30 members each. Gang policing in New York covers friendship groups and neighborhood groups. It is not limited to gangs. The database is populated entirely using non-criminal criteria. People are added to the gang database based on what they post on social media, what they wear, their friends and relatives, and where they live, with no notice and no ability to challenge their inclusion. The NYPD's Office of Inspector General's report last year found that people could be added to the gang database for wishing a friend happy birthday or for using certain emojis. They found that gang locations included NYCHA properties, whole precincts, and people's home addresses. Children as young as 13 are added to the gang database, and they've added people down to age 11 in the past. And the NYPD also lacked documentation for many entries. They used illegally sealed arrests and denied 100% of FOIL. The resulting gang database is 99% Black and Latinx, 99%. The NYPD claimed this is about precision policing, but it is only precise in how it profiles and targets only Black and Latinx youth. There are no white supremacists, no mafia, no Russian or Armenian gangs, no Proud Boys, almost no white people in the gang database. Back to the stop and frisk connection. The domain awareness system means the gang designation is available to every police officer and puts a target on those that are labeled as gang members. Our youth report being stopped as regularly as they were at the height of stop and frisk, some monthly, some multiple times a week. As the Federal Monitor reports, 11 years on, the NYPD still has no plan for equal protection. Stops, frisk, and searches are all increasing. Moreover, the neighborhood safety teams, public safety teams, and housing are the officers most likely to conduct self-initiated stops, unconstitutional stops, and searches. The harms of this policing cannot be overstated. Individuals are not safe online. They are not safe in the streets. They are dragged unnecessarily into the criminal system, often for minor offenses. They are denied off-ramps and second chances in criminal and family courts. They are held at Rikers and subjected to violence. They are punished for the crimes of others. All this because of a label that is affixed by the NYPD without criminal conduct, and a label that is reserved for Black and Latinx New Yorkers. Of utmost concern as we look to the future, gang-labeled individuals are subjected to ICE sweeps, detention, removal, and denied discretionary immigration relief. In closing, I make 3 asks. First, the Gangs Coalition asks that you support Intro 798, which would abolish the gang database. Second, ask the OIG, the Federal Monitor, and the NYPD to track and study investigative encounters of gang-labeled individuals. And third, of course, increase community-based supports for vulnerable youth to protect and promote true community safety. Thank you for this opportunity to testify, and the Gangs Coalition written testimony will include more citations and facts to support this.
Thank you. Before we go with the next member of the panel, I just want to acknowledge that we've been joined by Councilmember Palladino.
Hello. My name is Kezalar Cornish, and I reside in Brooklyn. I'm a member of a civil rights union of Voices of Community Activist Leaders, and a member of Community United for Police Reform. We're trying to end mass incarceration and harmful policing. I'm here to testify on police misconduct and corrupt police practices that I've endured personally. I want to express to the panel that for most of my life, I felt powerless against the seemingly God-given authority that the New York Police Department has had over me and most of the people that I've known growing up our entire lives. When we're in front of these police officers and other representatives of law enforcement, we feel powerless. We feel as if they're given this God-like and God-given-like authority, which should not be, since they're supposedly working for the citizenry, and we are citizens for sure. Besides the powerlessness, when the cops stop pedestrians, they feel like they have to put their hands up. Why is the public trained to be fearful in that way? Right? It's because it's so ingrained within society that it's now become a normal thing, like it's the norm. Although that's actually not policing, but that's just a culture that has developed over the years. So this reduces the citizens to being a suspect. The police department is deemed more important than the people that they're actually working for. When, the reports are written and people are speaking about the interaction between the citizen and the police, normally they're concerned about if the police was safe, as if they're not there for the safety of the citizenry. And that seems to be, the reverse of what it should be. But that's not the case, and we all know that the case is they're concerned about whether the officer, was safe or not. And, that's viable as well. He should be safe. We don't condone the fact that, police officers should be harmed or hurt in any way, shape, or form, but at the same time, We think that the overriding concern should be about the pedestrians that are walking the street, going about their way. I want to share a personal experience. Many years ago, over 30-something years ago, I was on a train, and a New York Police Department officer stopped the train and was patrolling the car. And we found that when the bulletin goes out for a particular suspect, what actually happens is that the New York Police Department begins to look for any black man that's suitable. And so I became the any black man. So he searched the car, and they were looking for, some description that we don't know of, but the people that were in the car with me. But this officer told me to step out the car. Now, I had an appointment. I was going to the studio. I could have possibly made some really big waves in the music industry, but that was derailed because of this incident that completely changed my life and impacted me, my family, and so forth and so on. I ended up doing 30 years, not for that crime, but because I was picked up for this crime that is now completely dismissed. And so because of this dismissed case, I ended up doing 30 years for unlawful conviction as well. So these types of illegal stops are still far too common in the city of New York. The consequences of my wrongful conviction was a direct result of that illegal stop. I didn't do anything. And because of the fact that the case is dismissed, there's no way for me to receive any recompense. There is no compensation when something is thrown out, and there's no way to actually take that information from the case and then bring it to the next case to show that this is not something that should be, because we have probable cause laws. We have the fruit of the poisonous tree, where if one thing happens, and then something else happens behind it, this fruit that it came from is something that, can't be in law.
Mr. Cornish, we're going to have to wrap, but I definitely, I hear you.
Yes.
And I want to say welcome home
Thank you so
for
much.
doing that time, the unjust time that you did.
And may I say one thing? I'm extremely proud, Mr. Yusuf Salam, to see you on this council. And I am glad to say welcome home to you as well.
Thank you.
Yes.
So, wow, this was definitely very passionate for me. I want to start in terms of questions to Mr. Felice, but I want to first, express my condolences for the loss of Alan, your brother. Mr. Felice, what reforms can NYPD make today to ensure that more tragedies like the one that happened to you and your family don't happen again?
Understanding that this council here is for something different from what my brother was stopped for. Like, we're talking here about regular traffic stops. My brother was stopped in a vehicle. We're talking about pedestrian stops here. I think it starts here at the pedestrian level, that it'll correlate and at some point translate to the police stops in the vehicles as well. But I would say having things that I would like to see is full-blown camera footage, no 10-second runoff, so you can see what is the reasoning that the officers are coming up with before they make the stop. That's audio and video. I would also like to see accountability. There aren't any reforms or trainings that will bring the level of understanding of the necessity for change without these officers being held accountable. At this moment, officers are not being held accountable for any of the actions, whether it's minor or it's for taking a life. So accountability is the biggest thing, and that's a start.
Thank you. You also mentioned that the NYPD's community response team. What is your experience with this unit in your neighborhood?
It hasn't been a good one. It's been one of, I would say, constant harassment, constant abuse of authority, and a lot of unfair practices where we feel at threat. And I would like to see things change because it's just getting worse than what we were promised. We were promised to have safer streets, and now we're at more fear to be outside and for those policing us. And these are happening in unmarked vehicles, so you don't know who's approaching you, who's coming out of these vehicles, so you don't know what's your first reaction until either it's a weapon in your face or them holding you down and telling you not to move because they want to see what's on your person. So it's just those practices of abuse that need to change.
And a question for the entire panel. It's been over 10 years since the Floyd trial concluded and the court ruled that NYPD had an unconstitutional pattern and practice of racial profiling and conducting unlawful stops. This case continues to this day with a federal monitor monitoring compliance with court-ordered reforms. In your opinion, if the NYPD wanted to end this case and get into constitutional compliance, what specific reform efforts would be most impactful to achieve this goal? And that's to the entire panel.
Thank you for the question, Chair Salam, and I can start. And I just wanted to quickly add about the CRT, just to note that the OIG recently released a report about the community response teams and the lack of transparency within the unit. So just to say that report exists about needing more transparency about how they engage. I think the question about how we end this monitorship is a big one, but I think maybe I can answer more so like how the NYPD can actually work towards being in constitutional compliance. The monitor, like I said, released this report around discipline, and I think discipline is a huge, and accountability, like many people have said on this panel, is a huge step towards compliance, right? I think officers, supervisors, police commissioners need to take this seriously in order to shift culture. Training is important. Having officers report on stops is important, but unless there's a real showing that there is consequence for not policing in a constitutional manner, for humiliating, harassing, racially profiling New Yorkers, we're not going to get anywhere. So I think that is a huge, huge step. And within that report that was released by the monitor, there's 55 recommendations about ways to change the New York City discipline process, specifically related to stop-and-frisk, for there to be more transparency and accountability. So I think that is a huge step, and we'll see what happens, what the court will do, because the hope is that there will be some recommendations ordered of the NYPD in regards to discipline relating to stop, question, and frisk. I think another issue is, I try to talk a lot about these specialized units. And we're seeing that these specialized units are the ones that are engaging, according to the monitor, the federal monitor, in a lot of these unconstitutional stops. And they're supposed to be highly trained, highly supervised. However, when you look at the data, you're seeing that they're engaged in more unconstitutional behavior than other officers, right? And so I think the use of these units, the revamping of these units, we had the street crime unit. They were plain clothes, they were disbanded. We had another iteration that was disbanded. And now we have NST, CRT, PST, right? And the entire purpose is for them to be doing precision investigative work, but what we're seeing is they're actually racially profiling folks. And so I think really looking at these units and deciding, do we need them? How are they being trained? Are officers who are actually engaged in unconstitutional behavior being rewarded and put on these units in order to target New Yorkers? I think those are questions that really need to be asked about how these units are being ran and what behavior they're engaging in.
I believe that it's a question of integrity, because many of these laws and the procedures that govern the police department, they speak about how to interact with the citizenry in such a way that is a degree of respect that goes on, but that is not practiced. And because it's not practiced, we create a culture of acceptance. And so, beyond that, if these bad practices result in criminal acts and so forth, but they're not being recognized as criminals, then who's actually law enforcement and who are the criminals? If law enforcement is allowed to commit crimes, because when you're going against the procedures and laws that are on the books, then you're committing a crime. But it seems as if somehow there's a gateway of acceptance and a blanket protection that goes over them to, as long as they have the color blue on. And so we're sending out the wrong signals to the population, because what you're saying is that just become a police officer and then you can do whatever you want to do. And so true individuals who have crime in mind for real, they say, oh, that's how we can do it and get away with it. And this is what it seems is going on. And so there has to be a degree of accountability. And the training, it's not about the training, because, it depends on whatever news conference is being held, that they'll say, we have the best training. And then as soon as something happens, then they're like, well, we need more training. But the reality is they are trained. And that means that they're making an informed decision as to whether or not they want to commit these foul practices. And that's something that has to be dealt with. Integrity and principle amongst the law enforcement when it comes to interacting with the populace, and to understand that you're working for the populace.
Reviewing the monitor reports over the last 11 years, it seems quite clear that actually when the NYPD does the responsive investigation, they are in 95, 96, 97% of compliance. The patrol officers have high compliance. It is the special units out there claiming predictive or precision, self-initiating stops that are not documenting their stops whatsoever, misrepresenting them, responsible for the vast majority of unconstitutional stops, unconstitutional frisk, and unconstitutional searches. As the public advocate pointed out, we cannot expect the police to do all the things. Their job is solving crimes, responding to calls. If we remove this part where they are somehow supposed to guess who is committing crimes and find them by stopping them, investigating them, until we remove that part, we will continue to see this abuse and particularly the racial profiling that characterizes it. So first, eliminate self-initiated stops and investigative encounters. Second, we do also need to eliminate the gang database, because once we have a label on someone that they are a gang member based on things they post on social media, that is automatically going to elevate the police interest in them, and they'll see reasonable suspicion where it might not otherwise exist. So in order to get rid of the equal protection violations, we must get rid of a database that is 99% Black and Latinx based on utterly lawful conduct. And on that note, I think we also need to proactively limit social media reviews. We have whole teams scouring only people of color social media. That can be used as an investigative technique in a responsive sense, but should not be self-initiated. We have to stop the mass surveillance of people of color. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to acknowledge that we've been joined also by Council Members De La Rosa and Aviles. And I want to pass the questions to Councilmember Caban to start.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you to everyone for your advocacy, your testimony. I want to ask a couple of questions about the gang database. Just to get in a little bit further detail, you talked about, obviously, the overrepresentation, particularly of Black and brown youth on the database. Can you tell me whether, in your experience, research that social connections that are like heavily influenced by proximity influence whether a youth is placed on that list?
Yes, 100%. And in fact, the OIG's report showed that many people were documented based on known associates, which could be a cousin, a friend, someone that they wish a happy birthday to on social media, but often just, photos of
Go
me
to
of
school
my friends.
with, live on the same floor.
Exactly.
And is-
there, just one moment,
Yeah,
there
sure.
they found that less than 1/3 of those documented based on known associates had enough information to even support that. So, kind of a
Yeah.
crazy.
In your experience and research, is it also true that even loose or tenuous associations can land you on the gang database list?
Absolutely. They'll say, there you are in the background of somebody's music video, or here you are in the same picture with so-and-so. That will land you on the gang database.
Great. Now, I want to give you just like an example, a hypothetical, and then maybe you can just give me a reaction to it. So I'm going to use myself as an example. I grew up in South Richmond Hill. I went to public elementary school and middle school. Where I live, the school was predominantly vast majority people of color and immigrants. And then I went to, may I continue, Chair? I'll wrap up quickly. Then I went to a Catholic high school in Northeast Queens, vast majority white, higher socioeconomic status, and my experience was that the factors that influence social connection, they mirrored in each of those places. The same ways we were connected to people at my high school, kids in the schools I went to when I was younger connected in that way, and they used social connections the same way. I would imagine today you can throw in, a little older, so throw in social media. When you look at it now, I was a public defender for 7 years, use social media very, very similarly. But for whatever reason, the kids that I grew up with in the neighborhood I grew up with were much, much more likely to be on a gang database, whereas I don't know anybody from my high school community that ended up the same, but the social connections and behaviors kind of mirrored each other. Like, can you talk, what's your reaction to that?
That's true. Young people, you can think about your child, your niece, your nephew, your cousin, think about the color of their skin, and that's going to determine whether for the exact same social media post, my 6-year-old nephew, every single time I see a post, he's got his hands up with his 3, 4, 5 friends. That same conduct will land a Black or Latinx New Yorker in the gang database. And I will say it's also 97% male. So you might not actually end up, it's very, just profiles. But the same conduct that will land Black and brown kids in the gang database will be ignored when white kids engage in it, even when there are more red flags. I do want to say all kids also make mistakes. All kids dress alike and act silly and even do stupid things. Your parents cannot control what you do when you're 16, 17. You certainly can't control what your other friends do. And finally, a lot of the social media back and forth, according to researchers who follow it, like Desmond Patton Upton and Lane is his last name, skipping my mind, see that, in the same way that rap battles and dance and break dance battles played out in the past to as a diversion for violence, actually the social media kind of conflicts and beefing is a way to keep violence off the street and kind of posture and act things out online. So, yeah, my reaction is 100%, and it's not fair. All children deserve to be children, to act silly, to try on different personalities, to dress like their friends, and to get second chances and, you know, thrive.
Thank you.
They're our future.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair.
May I speak to that?
Go for it.
Okay. So what we found in the community is that you can get in a gang database if you just have a tattoo. And we've also found that many of the people who are on the policing special units that are supposed to be gang specialists, they create a whole listing of things that are supposedly gang-related that are not. And because there's no oversight, they get to say whatever they want to say. And so they may have inside the listing, when you throw up a peace sign or a deuces sign, you're a gang member. Even if they get a picture of you with that. Now, your mother may be 84 years old and she's doing a peace sign with all of her grandchildren, and she will be labeled as a gang member in some way, shape, or form, because this is the culture and this is what's being done, but there is no oversight. Now, we do also understand that there are gang members who have reformed themselves and changed their lives, and they're doing really good things in terms of education, producing jobs, and just being productive citizens. But they're not utilizing any of them so that they can actually verify and say whether or not this is what this is and this is what this, you know, what is not, so that they can make a real determination as to whether or not these are gang members or these are gang signs or any of those sorts of things. And many of them are just basic things that we do when we take pictures, you know, as the lady said. So, you know, I think a little bit of common sense and oversight from entities outside of the police department. There should be some citizenry involved in these special units that can say, come on, you're being ridiculous. That's a peace sign. Come on. You know? Yeah.
Thank you. I just want to acknowledge that we've been joined by Councilmember Stephen and Councilmember Joseph. I'm going to pass it to Councilmember Ayala.
Thank you. First and foremost, I wanted to direct a comment at Sammy Feliz. I just want to say that I'm happy to see you here today, and that I join you and your family in calling for accountability from the NYPD and firing Lieutenant Jonathan Rivera. It's been a long time, and I think that the NYPD has an opportunity here to do the right thing and to regain the trust of the individuals that they serve every single day. Ms. Howell, could you tell us a little bit more about how an individual ends up, especially, I mean, you mentioned that there were young kids as young as 13 on the gang database. Is the only way to get on, what is the way to get on the gang database? I heard that you referenced, you know, pictures and some social media. Is DNA also a part of that factor?
DNA is not used, to the best of my knowledge. There are 3 ways of ending up on the gang database. One is self-admission, but the NYPD will interpret a social media posting with a emoji or free so-and-so or rest in peace so-and-so as self-admission to admitting to being in a gang, so they interpret social media posts. That is one and probably the most common way to end up on the gang database. The NYPD has a smart unit social media analysis and research team or something that spends their time looking at young people and many people's of color's social media. A second way is through 2 independent sources, although the independent sources are almost all NYPD, the precinct, intel, the school safety officers. So, and the OIG's report says that of the people who are certified based on 2 sources, 27% actually did not have two sources listed. 9% had 0 sources listed. The most common way is 2 or more of the other criteria seen in a known gang location, which, as I said, could be your whole precinct, your NYPD property, your home address, seen with known gang associates. If they've labeled your friends gang members, that could be one of the criteria. As was mentioned, tattoos, clothing, color. So appearance, association, and expression. There's not a single criteria that involves being convicted of anything. So many people end up on the gang databases based on social media, but others can be. It incentivizes to stop, too. I see 3 kids hanging around. I've already identified one of them as gang member. I could put the other 2 in. They're in a known gang location, like the basketball court near their home, and they're with a known gang member. Boom, boom. You can put a 13-year-old on the gang database. There's no review. You know, this is the end run around the Fourth Amendment and the Floyd and equal protection. They're collecting information without necessarily trying to put it into court, but when they talk to a DA and say this person is gang involved, that means the DA is looking to move them to adult court or deny youthful offender or wrap them up in a bigger case. So you could get on without knowing it either. You won't be notified.
Yeah, I just, one follow-up. Do you know what the number is of individuals on the database to date?
According to the OIG's report, which is the last number we had, I think it was 16,700, someplace between 16 and 17,000. And I foiled that several times, which is the only way we've ever known what the numbers are until this OIG report of April of 2023.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to pass it to Councilmember Holden.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, panel. How many attorneys are on this panel? Okay. Since you're an expert on policing, or have testified to that fact, have any of you done ride-alongs? You've done how many? I can't hear you.
1.
Done 1, okay.
I have not.
Okay. And would you admit that policing is dangerous?
Can you admit that being black in America is dangerous?
I didn't ask you, sir.
My
questions are directed, if we're gonna allow this, I asked the 2 attorneys.
I just want to highlight that the point of this panel is to uplift the experience of people who've been directly impacted. So I'm happy to answer the question as an attorney. I think, there are many instances where engaging in any type of interpersonal or one-on-one interaction can be dangerous.
Of course.
And I too will say that especially engaging in proactive, self-initiated encounters, jumping out when you're not in uniform, those encounters are very dangerous, and reducing stop and frisk and investigative encounters and making them responsive would make police safer and make our community safer.
Okay, on March 25th, police officer Jonathan Diller approached a vehicle with 2 individuals inside. He was shot and killed when he approached the vehicle. The one person, Guy Rivera, allegedly shot him. Guy Rivera had 21 prior arrests. The guy that was driving, Lindy Jones, had 14 prior arrests and was out on bail for a weapons charge. Now, put yourself in those positions and just think of how dangerous this job is. When you leave for the day, leave your wife and child, young wife and young child, and you go out into the streets of New York and are dealing with the most dangerous people. It's not an exact science. Things can happen. Things can go very, very bad either way. But I understand, because I've done 3 ride-alongs, and I've seen officers, you may not like what I'm saying, but this is the truth. This job is very, very dangerous. and at any time you can get shot, just like the streets of New York. But you're dealing with the worst of society many times, especially the special units. So we hear one side, but sometimes we have to hear the other side and see and actually understand the other side. That the police officers and the vast majority are hardworking. They go out risking their lives for the citizens of New York City. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Will we be able to say anything to that, or? No? Okay.
So I want to pass it to Councilmember Palladino.
Good morning. I have to say, I want to ask you all a question. Are you racist? Are you racist? I want to go down the line. I'd like to start first with the gentleman that's representing the Center for Constitutional Rights.
I would like to bring back on topic
That's
and order
inappropriate.
to the
well,
dais.
Yet we sat here and we've listened to comments that I consider racist. No, this is two sides here. It's not, I didn't get to that, Diana. Okay, wait, one moment. We are doing it.
I wanna make
yes,
sure-
we are. This is a hearing. This
I want to
is a
make
hearing.
sure
Yes,
that-
we are.
Can I,
I'd like to recognize
can we just level
the
set
people
for a
on the
second?
panel.
Can we level set for a second? I would like to make sure that we have a respectful dialogue. That's what
Absolutely.
this is about.
That's absolutely
So
correct.
I would like to say this because
You,
the respect that has to be acknowledged on both sides is to, in fact, especially for this young man at the end who lost his family member, to ask this young man if he's racist is a very
general
problematic
question.
thing.
I did not.
I know
go
it's a
down the
general
line.
question, but we have to begin to start.
Can I, let
with
me
the
start
end in
over.
mind, which is
Let me
respect.
start over. Let me start over. We have 4 people sitting on this panel. One is the Center for Coalitional Rights. The other represents the Justice Committee. The other represents Vocal New York. And the other represents the Gangs Coalition. Now, I've sat here and I've listened to you speak. And I'm really I was going to get to you and your loss of your family member. And I wanted to start there, and I wanted to start the right way. And the right way was this. I'm sorry for your loss. I wanted to move on to the gentleman who represents Vocal New York. When you spoke about and what happened to you 30-some-odd years ago, I want you to be aware, I was around 30-some-odd years ago, and we were pulled out of cars, too, because they didn't like the way we wore our hair, or they didn't like the way we dressed, or anything like this. We have made this situation here a black and brown issue. This is not a black and brown issue. And I sit here each and every time, and I listen to what is supposed to be the safety committee, and I listen to everybody turn this into black and white or brown and white, as if the people who are white-skinned don't matter at all. And this is absolutely pushed too far. Our police officers do their job. My colleague brought up the most recent murder of a police officer. We have a gang problem whether you like it or not. Trump is going to be our next president whether anybody likes it or not. And you know what? As far as the gang's database goes, soon enough we won't much have to worry, because a lot of our gang members are here illegally, and they will be deported. Now, with that being said,
Let's make
that
sure
doesn't sit real well, does it? Well, I'm here to tell you that our police do their very best, and there are innocent cops getting killed each and every day. And I'm really sorry.
Thank you, Councilmember Palladino.
Councilmember
I'd like to
Palladino,
pass
I'm
the-
really sorry. That's why
I'd
my
like to pass
thoughts
the-
get
pass
jumbled
this-
up.
I would like to
because
pass-
I get interrupted every time I talk, because you don't
Councilmember,
like what
you're
I
out of
have to
order.
say.
Councilmember,
Okay,
you're
well,
out of
that's
order.
enough.
Councilmember? Thank you, Councilmember Palladino. I would like to pass, thank you, Councilmember Palladino. I would like
You
to
don't
pass.
cut anybody else off, do you?
Thank you,
You don't cut
Councilmember
anybody else
Palladino.
off at these hearings, do you? But Palladino gets cut off.
I would like to regain order of this dais and in this chamber. Thank you, Councilmember Palladino. I would just like to recognize for the record that this is the United States of America. We have been living in the divided states of America, and we're trying to get back to what the ideals of what this country is about. We haven't gotten there yet. This hearing is an attempt to restore balance. That's what this hearing is about. And we have to make sure that we respect each other and hear each other. So I'd like to pass the microphone to Councilmember De La Rosa.
First of all, let me say that Sammy Feliz and Alan Feliz were my constituents. And I will be damned in this body if I have members of this body question this family that has lost their son, their father, their brother. Do not speak to me because I am not speaking to you. Because I'm looking at you because you know what you said. So let me just say that my condolences goes out to this family who is seeking justice. All of us leave our house in the morning, trying to get back home at night. All of us deserve safety. But what I do know is that the men in my community in Washington Heights, Inwood, and Northern Manhattan have been in the crosshairs on the war of drugs my entire life. And I do not need to go on a ride-along to know what happens on the streets of my neighborhood because I walk the streets of my neighborhood every single day. And I've been stopped. For standing in front of my building, I've been stopped. So, therefore, I do not need, having a ride-along does not make you an expert in how policing happens. And there are two very, very opposing tales to that story. So I will put that there for the record. And the other thing, too, is I'm an immigrant, and I'm a proud immigrant, and I'm the first Dominican woman elected to this body from my community. So do not question, okay, the contributions of immigrants in this chamber. With that being said, I want to say that one of the things that we are guided by in this conversation is data. Data that is publicly available and rare, because it is not always publicly available. But what we do see in the data that is available is a glimpse in a system that is not working and that has not been working. A system that treats my children differently than it treats children of people on this dais. Period. Black and brown New Yorkers being stopped, questioned, and frisked unconstitutionally. And those numbers are on the rise under this administration. So what I hope to get out of this hearing, since the circus has begun, is to make sure that we are able to ask the questions that pertain to why the system is working inequitably in communities like mine. So I have one question for this panel, and my question is, in your experiences with the gang database, with what we're seeing with the new units that have been put out into the street, are you seeing that the data that is available after an interaction is accurate and up-to-date and readily available in cases where accountability and discipline are needed for the NYPD? That's my question.
The short answer is no. The database is secret. They do not tell people they're on the gang database. The Legal Aid Society has started a FOIL Yourself campaign, and they normally have to make the FOIL request, have it denied, and then sued to follow up. So that is a data piece that we would very much like. The Office of Inspector General of the LAPD has analyzed gang unit stops. They have specific units and found that they are longer and more likely to end up with searches and unconstitutional searches than other stops. So that's data we're missing, and we really appreciate this City Council's efforts with this How Many Stop Acts and the Monitor report and the OIG's report in New York to fill some holes, but there are many more holes than certainties.
I would just like to state for the record, I'm with the Center for Constitutional Rights. And so for the specialized units, neighborhood safety team, the public safety teams, and the community response teams, which I think are misnamed in the ways that they interact with communities, but the data is available with regards to Terry stops, so those are level 3 stops. And that data is what the federal monitor uses for reports and to do analysis as to whether or not the NYPD is in compliance. But like I said earlier, the issue with the data is that it's shown that a substantial amount of the data is actually not available because about 30% of stops are not being reported on or properly documented. And so part of that problem is that, whether it's officers just not documenting, whether it's officers thinking it's like a level 2 encounter when actually it's a stop that needs to be documented on. We're seeing that there's a huge chunk of the data missing. And then there have been discussions, I don't think that's what this hearing is about, around like CCRB's access to body-worn camera and other information when they are doing disciplinary hearings and trying to get information in order to move discipline along. So I think that's another part of, available data. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
In terms of data and accurate data, since there's no oversight, any piece of data that we receive is data that is put out by the same people who are corrupt in terms of their police practicing. And if we were to go further, which we should, it's not just about racism. We find that most of the data crunching has to do with funding. And so we have to look into the economics of this thing because they create what you call job security. That is a term in law enforcement. And so they target people and continue to keep people coming to the prison system so that they can ensure that their jobs will be there and available for them and their children as they go on 10, 20 years from now. And so in terms of any data, there has to be some sort of outside agency or groups of people that are there to determine whether or not the data that's coming in is actually accurate.
Thank you. Moving along, I'm gonna pass it to Councilmember Stevens.
So I'm just gonna start off by saying this. Everybody wants to be safe. And this idea that just because we are focusing on a group of people that has historically and disproportionately been affected by the brutality of NYPD, we are here trying to right the wrongs and set the balance straight. I wanna be safe. I am not the enemy of NYPD. I'm not the enemy of Republicans. We are all here. But let's be clear, if we want to talk about race, then why do we have a database that has 99% people of color on it and no one else? So the question isn't to ask us if we're racist. The question is to ask us the practices that NYPD are putting into place racist. And that's where we need to start, and that's why we are focusing on this. So it is unacceptable for us to be in here and act victims if they're racist. So I have to say that because it's unacceptable. I worked with kids for 20 years who have been terrorized, and what I say to NYPD all the time, we need to fix the right and fix the trauma that they've caused in our community before we can do anything else. They're not our enemies, so a young person does not want to play basketball with you if you have not addressed the traumas that when they come out the community center, you're gonna kick their ass. And it happens all the time in my community. And I'm sick of it. And so we will not sit in this chambers today and victimize people who are consistently victimized. So I'm gonna start there. But I do have a question about the database because, again, it's 99% Black and Latinos, which is a problem for me because it's, to me, baseline, racist, we're done, let's move on. But we keep getting pushback. Babe, can you tell us how many young people, or if you know how many young people have been foiled to find out if they were on the database? Do you have that information?
I don't. I'm pretty sure there's somebody from legal aid who could answer. I know it's more than 500.
But do you know how a young person or a person who's on a database, do you know how they would get off the database?
There is no way to get off the database. There's no way to appeal. They can be reviewed at age 23 and 28. They're supposed to be reviewed every 3 years. Those reviews are happening late, and only one person is looking at them. There is no input from the individual to get themselves off the database. And by the way, They do enter people as young as 11 and 13, but up to age 70 as well.
And just real quick, has there been other databases like this across the country? And if so, were they eliminated? Do you know the status of those? And then I'm done.
Yes, these types of gang databases are very common, and what they have in common is, A, they often rely on entirely non-criminal criteria, as the New York City one does, and that they are typically wildly and disproportionately Black and Latinx or non-white people of color. Portland and Chicago have eliminated their gang database. LDF just has a report out saying that that had no effect on crime rates before and after, no statistically significant effect. LA is also backing off of their gang database, and we're hopeful that those databases will be changed. London also had a gangs matrix, also included people based on no criminality. They've reformed it somewhat, but this is a push that we should show leadership in. There is no reason for the NYPD or any other police department to keep data on people based on no criminal activity. There's no reason for that. So I'd like us, we won't be number one, Portland wins and then Chicago, but I think we'd be the biggest shining example when we eliminate this database.
Thank you. I think part of that is as New York goes, so does the rest of the nation. I'd like to thank you all for your testimony, and I'd like to now introduce our panel of administration witnesses and turn it over to the committee council to swear them in. So we'll be joined by Chief Jeffrey Madry, Deputy Commissioner Michael Gerber, Deputy Commissioner Paul Gamble, Assistant Chief Julie Morel, Assistant Deputy Commissioner Rebecca Blumenkoff, Director of Legal Affairs Unit Josh Levin.
Okay, if everybody from the NYPD who plans to testify could raise their right hands. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee and respond honestly to council member questions? Noting for the record that all witnesses answered affirmatively, you may begin your testimony.
Good morning, Chair Salam and members of the council. My name is Michael Gerber, and I'm the Deputy Commissioner of Legal Matters for the New York City Police Department. I'm joined here today by Chief of Department Jeffrey Madry. On behalf of Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch, we are here to testify regarding the department's policies and practices in connection with investigative encounters. These encounters, covering a wide range of circumstances, are at the heart of policing and public safety. As you know, the New York courts recognize 4 different types of investigative encounters. A level 1 encounter is a request for information. At level 1, there must be an objective, credible reason to approach, but it does not require that the officer suspect the individual of criminality. Level 1 encounters include conversations with victims and witnesses, those who might be victims or witnesses, those who might have evidence regarding a crime, who might know where a missing child is located, or who may, for whatever reason, be in need of police assistance. A level 2 encounter, based on the common law right of inquiry, requires an officer to have a founded suspicion of criminal activity. At level 2, as at level 1, the individual is free to leave. At level 3, by contrast, where an officer has reasonable suspicion that a person has committed, is committing, or is about to commit a crime, the officer has the authority to temporarily detain that person in what is often referred to as a Terry stop. Finally, in a level 4 encounter, there is probable cause that a person has committed an offense and is subject to arrest. For years, the department has reported to the City Council on level 3 and level 4 encounters. Late last year, the City Council passed the How Many Stops Act, which requires the department to provide quarterly data regarding level 1 and level 2 encounters. For months, we convened an executive-level working group. We created new policies and procedures, new electronic forms, new systems to aggregate the data, and new training for our officers. In October, consistent with the How Many Stops Act, we reported the required data for the third quarter of 2024. This is a major change for the department, and we continue to learn and improve. It is no secret that the department was opposed to the level 1 component of the How Many Stops Act. We are not here to rehash that debate. We are committed to complying with the law, and we have worked very hard and in good faith to meet our obligations under the law. With regard to level 3 encounters, the department has been under a federal monitorship for a decade. I want to emphasize that I cannot speak for the monitor. Only the monitor can do that, and she speaks through her reports. That said, I want to offer a few observations on behalf of the department. When it comes to the monitorship and the constitutionality of level 3 encounters, the department has made tremendous progress. We have rewritten our policies and revamped our training. Level 3 stops have fallen by over 90% since 2011. There has been a significant shift in the nature of policing in this city. That said, there is still more work to be done. The department works closely with the monitor, and we learn from the monitor. There are times when we agree with the monitor's critiques. There are times when we disagree. But it is always a collaborative relationship in which we are fully engaged and responsive. I want to close by emphasizing that we are discussing encounters that take place on the street in situations that can be fast-moving, complicated, and potentially dangerous. Officers are asked to make split-second decisions, sometimes with incomplete information, and often with concerns about public safety and their own safety. This is challenging work, and the challenge is compounded by the fact that the law in this area is incredibly complex and fact-specific. Retired Judge Barry Kemmons, who literally wrote the book on the subject, has explained how confusing the law in this area can be. He writes, "Probably no area of search and seizure law has caused more confusion and frustration than that of street encounters with the police, where the officer acts on less than probable cause. New York appellate courts have acknowledged for some time that the subject is riddled with problems. The First Department has stated that one of the most vexing of judicial issues is the delineation of permissible police intrusion upon the liberty of the private citizen in a street encounter. The same court has noted that seemingly similar fact patterns sometimes result in different outcomes and lead to confusion." He continues, "One of the primary reasons for the state of confusion in this area is the diversity of fact patterns involving street encounters and the realization that the proper determination in cases of this sort must necessarily turn on the facts in each individual case. Two separate cases with almost identical facts can produce different results because of a subtle difference in only one factor. If there is any conclusion one can draw from this, it is the realization that this is not a precise and exact body of law with equations that can readily produce easy solutions. This is a lawyer and judge writing for other lawyers and judges who have the benefit of time to ponder the facts, review court decisions, debate abstract legal principles, and ultimately decide how to analyze and categorize a particular encounter. We require our police officers, most of whom are not lawyers, to do this out on patrol, in real time, sometimes in highly volatile situations. We must require this of our officers because it is the law. But I think it is important, as we discuss these issues, to acknowledge how much we demand of our police officers and how challenging their work can be. Thank you for the opportunity to testify about these important issues. We look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you for your testimony. Before we dive into the details of policing and procedures, I would like to start by asking a simple, big-picture question. Do you believe that racial profiling or other forms of bias are reflected in how the department and its officers engage with civilian and conduct investigative encounters?
So the CCRB, as you know, has responsibility for investigating racial profiling, bias-based policing. They took that over, I guess it was end of last year, really beginning of this year. And that process, they have a whole unit that looks at this, investigates cases. Some matters have not been substantiated, some matters have. Those allegations and those cases then make their way through our disciplinary system. We do have a number of such cases pending, and I think those cases need to play out through that disciplinary system. Obviously, these are incredibly sensitive cases, incredibly serious allegations. The presumptive penalty for bias-based policing or racial profiling is termination, and rightfully so. But, of course, there's a need for due process and for these cases to play out. And that's what's actually happening. That's what's happening now, and that's what will be happening in the future.
I would just want to push a little bit more on this because the goal of today is to have an honest conversation and discuss potential reforms. And we must agree on the underlying facts. It remains a consistent and painful truth that despite over a decade of oversight from the federal monitor and ongoing efforts to reform department practices, whether or not you are stopped by the NYPD still seems to be influenced by the color of your skin. In 2013, when a federal judge found that the NYPD was liable for a pattern of practices of racial profiling in violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, approximately 82% of people stopped by the police were Black and Latino, even though these two groups made up only 52% of the city's population. While the total number of stops has gone down over the years, the racial disparities in who gets stopped has gotten worse. Last year, 90% of the people stopped by the NYPD were people of color. Is the NYPD comfortable continuing policing practices that have resulted in Black and brown New Yorkers being stopped at a rate nearly 8 times greater than that of white people? Or would you agree that these stark racial disparities are an indication that there are department practices that must change so that every community in New York City is policed the same way?
So I think in answering that question, I would start with referring to the Monitor's report on this issue earlier this year. The Monitor did a very comprehensive, detailed, very nuanced report about racial disparities. It came out, I'm not sure the exact month, but it was definitely earlier this year. Looking at racial disparities 2013 to 2022, I believe. And that report in some ways, that report describes some very positive developments, but also pointed to some issues like the ones you're talking about that really do require very careful analysis. So I do want to highlight that in terms of the post-stop disparities, and that was a major issue in Floyd back in the day, the sort of post-stop racial disparities along a variety of lines: arrest, summons, use of force, recovery of contraband. The monitor found that those racial disparities, and the monitor used a sophisticated statistical model, which I could not describe to you. I'm not a statistician, but the monitor found that those disparities in many cases had collapsed entirely, which is welcome news. And even with regard to frisks and searches post-stop, depending on which year you were looking at and depending on the race, again, you saw disparities that either had been narrowed or collapsed entirely. So that is very positive. Now, the report also pointed to the issue, Chair Salam, that you just described, which is that the racial breakdown in terms of stops, even as a total number has fallen, the sort of racial breakdown has remained roughly the same over time. One thing we are working on right now is a 14th Amendment compliance plan with the monitor. And that's something that's incredibly important. It's important for the monitorship. It's important to address the issues that you're talking about. I don't think I can say too much about the substance because it has not been approved by the monitor yet. But we provide the monitor with a draft. We got comments back. We're in that process. There will be input from plaintiff's counsel as well. And any 14th Amendment compliance plan obviously has to have the final approval of the monitor. But I'll say, big picture, that the entire point of that compliance plan is to get at these issues, to look at these disparities, to do it in a quantitative way, in a rigorous way, and understand what is driving that. So I do want to say that that's something that we're actually very focused on. It's been a priority of ours in connection with the monitorship. And that's something we're hoping to implement. Again, as we go back and forth with the monitor, we need to get to something that the monitor obviously approves. We also will need to get input from plaintiff's counsel, which is very important.
So developing this plan has been a legal mandate for over 10 years. I have a very simple question. What's taking so long, and what are the details of that plan?
When you say the plan, do you mean the 14th Amendment compliance plan, or you mean monitorship compliance more generally?
The 14th Amendment. Yes.
Yeah. So I think it's a fair question. I think it's a fair critique. I think in the early years of the monitorship, I think there was a lot of focus on revising policies, revising training. There has been for a long time now, I think, a lot of focus on the Fourth Amendment piece. I think it is totally fair to say that the monitor has been pushing the department to do a 14th Amendment compliance plan for quite some time. And there certainly was an extended period of time when we had not done that. It's a fair criticism. But something we really made a push on this calendar year, is to fill that gap. So we're doing it now, working with the monitor on that, and it is a priority.
In September, at the request of the federal monitor, a report was published that included recommendations for how long the department could curb misconduct by improving disciplinary procedures. I want to ask about some of these recommendations, many of which directly relate to curbing unconstitutional investigative encounters. The report explains that when the CCRB recommends penalties for misconduct, the police commissioner often decreases them when an officer asserts that their actions were in good faith or a mistake. Does the NYPD have a written policy regarding how officer discipline is impacted by claims that an officer acted in good faith or due to a mistake?
Yeah, sure. So the patrol guide 21211, which is sort of covers investigative encounters generally, and it does speak to this issue. And I think it's important to emphasize that 21211, what I'm about to describe, is monitor approved, court approved. It's not just our acting unilaterally, because obviously many patrol guide procedures we do ourselves. That's not true for 21211. Because of the monitorship, that was the product of court oversight, and frankly, if we make changes to that that relate to the monitorship in any way, we need to get approval from the monitor. So 21211 says that to the extent you have one-time, inadvertent, good faith mistakes, Instructions and training are appropriate, and it's not presumptively discipline. And that point, I think, actually makes very good sense in light of what I said a moment ago about the complexity of the law in this area. It is an incredibly complex area of law. There are many situations in which multiple lawyers are looking at body-worn camera video, and we're debating, is it a level 2, is it a level 3? It's one thing for lawyers to debate that, and ultimately, of course, we have to categorize it, we have to make a decision. The monitor and her team and her work have to make that decision. That's necessary and understandable. But of course, the police officer in the moment who gets that wrong, that one-time mistake, that good faith mistake, our policy says training and instruction is appropriate, and I think that's right. Now, to the extent that someone has gotten training and instruction over and over and over again and continues to do the same thing, then there is a need for discipline. That is 100% true. And to the extent we've gotten away from that, to the extent we've gotten in a situation where someone is repeatedly receiving instructions and training over and over, at some point that's no good, and there needs to be discipline. And I can say also, this is an issue. We have a new police commissioner, as you know. She is aware of this issue. She's been briefed on this issue. I think you're going to see her very much addressing this issue. Commissioner Tisch is very much a problem solver. This is a problem. It is going to get solved.
The report also notes that a stop, a failure to file a report, a frisk, or a search are all separate and distinct acts, and that penalties for each type of misconduct should be assessed consecutively and not concurrently. In other words, if an officer conducts an illegal stop, goes on to conduct an illegal search, and then fails to fill out the required report right now, they will and are often penalized as if they are engaging in one act of misconduct and not 3. So my question is, why does the NYPD allow an officer disciplinary penalties for distinct acts to be served concurrently? And in what circumstances does the department impose disciplinary penalties that require it to be served consecutively?
So I'm going to answer your question in one moment. I just want to say two things first. One, I do want to say, the report you're referring to, the Yates report, the court has set sort of a schedule for us to provide comments on that, and we're going to do that consistent with, the court's direction. I am going to answer your question. I just do want to be clear, there is like a separate sort of judicial process for us to do that. I certainly don't want to. I don't want to be any suggestion that this is sort of usurping that or a substitute for that. I also do want to say that, again, when it comes to discipline, we have a new police commissioner, and she's looking at these issues, and I certainly would not want to get ahead of her. That said, when it comes to concurrent versus consecutive penalties, two things. One, the matrix actually does speak to this. There's an entire section in the matrix about concurrent and consecutive penalties. We actually worked on this language with the monitor's team, and we made certain revisions to that language that were approved by the monitor. That's one thing. The second thing is, in the scenario you described, it depends. It depends on the particular circumstances. And the question is, are we talking about one problem or multiple problems? So imagine a police officer who believes, for example, that they've received consent. They think they have consent, for whatever reason. And they're wrong about that, right? And so they think it's a level 2, they think they have consent. Consistent with the consent they believe they have, there's a frisk, there's a search. They don't do a level 3 report because they think they're at level 2. Now, that's a mistake. That's a mistake. And consistent with our disciplinary system, consistent with the matrix, consistent with many things, there may well be a need for discipline. But if it is really one mistake, I'm not sure they should be penalized multiple times for that, right? Now, to the extent you have an officer who is, deliberately saying, okay, I know there's a level 3 encounter, but I'm gonna fly right by that. I'm not gonna do a report. I'm separately gonna do unconstitutional frisk. Again, if they are independent acts and independent decisions, I hear exactly what you're saying in terms of the need for a disciplinary system to account for that. There's also a matter of fairness. If someone's making one mistake that plays out in multiple ways, I think that the system should account for that as well.
Thank you. I'm going to pass the to Councilmember Caban. And also, I want to just note that we've been joined by Councilmember Ariola on Zoom.
Thank you. I want to start by talking about the How Many Stops Act, and specifically about that level 1 stop that's being reported. One of the reasons for the encounter that officers can select on the level 1 form is QOL, which we know to mean quality of life. Can you explain what that means, and what are examples of behaviors or actions a New Yorker might take that would result in an officer initiating a level 1 encounter with them?
In connection with QOL, you mean, with quality of life?
No, so you can select that on the form, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Can you explain what that means if an officer is selecting QOL on that form? What does that mean?
Right. So
and then what are the examples of the behaviors or actions that a New Yorker might take that would result in an officer initiating that level 1
Sure.
and filling out the form that way?
Sure. And just to be clear, right? So it's not a stop, right? I think it's important. Level 1 encounters by definition.
We know that. I have limited time, so I would like to know what are the behaviors or actions.
I mean, you referred to it as a stop, but it's not a stop. And to answer your question, I would say typically, right, it's a quality of life situation, meaning, let's say there have been 311, 911 calls about a quality of life issue in that neighborhood. We have a variety of things. Officers, go to that area. They're trying to understand what's going on. They see people who might be witnesses, who might have information about that quality of life matter, and they have a level 1 encounter, and they say, "Hey, we got reports about X. Have you seen that? Have you heard that? Is that an issue around here?" That I think would be the typical scenario.
Well, what kinds of violations and crimes are the officers looking for when they engage in these quality of life related level 1 encounters?
It could be really any matter where there's been either a 911 call, 301 calls, community complaints.
Okay.
Obviously, there's a range of things. I do want to be clear,
But
though.
violations and crimes, right? Because we get a lot of 311 calls about conditions that don't amount to the violations of our penal codes. So what are the kinds of violations and crimes officers are looking for when they engage?
But I do want to be clear, right? The level 1 encounter here is almost never, I don't think, really ever going to be a situation where you think that the person you're talking to engaged in some quality of life offense or violation. That would be exceedingly rare, almost impossible, because frankly, quality of life violations, you're almost always, frankly, at probable cause. In the vast majority of situations, you see something happening.
That's not my question.
I'm trying to answer your question.
No, it's simply what kinds of violations and crimes are officers looking for when they engage in this? So you're not answering
It could be anything. It could be,
Okay.
hey, we have a graffiti issue here in the area.
Okay.
Hey, there's been a question
Thank you.
about
So it
drag
could be anything
racing.
is your answer. So it could be anything.
It could be anything
that
that comes
initiates
in,
a level 1 encounter.
something that comes in as a quality of life
Okay.
concern. 911, 311. Those are, as you know,
Okay.
often
Well,
violations,
thank
occasionally
you.
misdemeanors.
Thank you, noted. So as of course you know, the NYPD has been asserting this whole time that level 1 encounters don't involve suspicion of criminal activity and therefore don't need to be reported. So there's some inconsistencies here, but certainly interested in seeing the connection between these level 1 encounters and broken windows policing. Okay, I am going to move on. I have a few questions regarding NYCHA housing. Are community members living in NYCHA housing especially dangerous?
Excuse me?
Are community members living in NYCHA housing especially dangerous?
No.
Okay. Does the NYPD believe that by living in NYCHA housing, people waive their constitutional protection from unreasonable searches?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Does the NYPD believe being black in a low-income neighborhood creates grounds for a reasonable search?
Absolutely not.
And does being black in any neighborhood create reasonable grounds to be searched?
The question is offensive, and the answer is no.
Okay, so if the question is offensive, why does your data consistently show that regardless of neighborhood, black people are subject to stop-and-frisk tactics more than any other race? If it's offensive, why does the data back up
Because
the justification for what I'm asking?
You are suggesting that we are targeting people because of their race, and we are not.
Well, what does the data say? Disproportionately, black and brown people are being searched, are being stopped and searched.
I took a look at the data. And of course, I want to do a deeper dive. I was looking at the data in preparation of this. But when I look at the neighborhoods that we're working in, where we're deploying, and I'm in charge of deployment along with my bureau chiefs. When I look at neighborhoods like East New York, a neighborhood I'm very familiar with, who has 650 robberies, versus Forest Hills, who have 79 robberies. Of course, we're going to be doing more enforcement over there. We're going to be deploying more.
I wonder where that
There's
is.
going to be more cops, all right? No, it's very much organized. There's more cops over there. We're doing more deployment there. We're addressing quality of life conditions and crime conditions. 55 shootings, 11 murders versus 0 in Forest Hills.
So would you say then
for that reason alone,
would you say that neighborhoods that are majority black are more crime prone or inherently
That is
dangerous?
not what the chief said.
but there are more crime issues there. I'm not saying it's more crime prone, but there are crimes that have been committed there.
Why are there more crime
And
issues
we have to, well, if there's more crimes there, maybe because of lack of resources and a whole lot of other things.
Oh, okay.
And I don't disagree with you on that
Okay.
point.
And so you take a neighborhood that has a lack of resources that then generates harmful behavior, and you send more police in when you've noticed that in these other neighborhoods with different demographics, you don't need to go out and police them because they have more resources.
Send police to keep people safe.
Chair, can I just finish this line of questioning with a
let's
couple
finish
more
it.
questions?
Yeah, just wanted to also
Thank
just
you.
say that we have, we're also going to have a second round.
Okay, I just have two more.
Oh, wait, let me answer the question. I have a duty to protect people. And when there's a high amount of shootings, a high amount of robberies, I have to send more cops over there, all right? Listen, I wish I could bring the resources over there. I look to you to bring the resources over there, all right? And not saying that.
Are you looking to the mayor to bring those resources?
I'm looking to you to bring the resources.
Have you asked the mayor to bring those resources?
All right, so with that being said,
Have you asked the mayor to bring those resources?
To bring police officers where crimes are being
But
committed.
have you asked the mayor for the resources for these
I
communities?
talk to the mayor all the time about
It's a yes or no question. Have you asked the mayor for the resources?
you please
like
stop
I
interrupting
said-
the chief?
Like I said, I have a duty to bring.
Yes
put
or
resources-
no?
He's not answering you yes or no.
All right, we're gonna come back for
So
a second
for
round.
the record, he will not answer whether he has, as a public safety servant, asked the mayor for resources that he knows reduces crime.
I've asked the mayor for resources for a lot of things, okay, a lot of things. But I'm talking
To my
specifically about
question.
my duty right
And
now.
I'm asking
that's to
you,
bring
in
more
my
police
capacity
in
as an
areas-
oversight officer.
In areas where we see crime.
It's a very simple question you did not answer. Thank you, Chair. I look forward to a second round.
Okay, we're going to come back for a second round. I'm going to pass the mic to Deputy Speaker Ayala.
Oh my goodness. Good afternoon or good morning or whatever it is at this point. I will start with the same thing that I say at every public safety hearing. I am not anti-NYPD, as you know, as much as that would please other people to say. We are not, you know, anti-keeping communities safe. We have questions. We have questions about discrepancies and maybe, you know, data that may look like it's more targeted towards a specific population. And so one of my questions was really on implicit bias training and wondering whether that's something that the department has implemented as part of the revamping of Stop-and-Frisk.
So just, you want to hear about training generally, about implicit bias in particular?
Implicit bias in particular.
Yeah, so that's something that we have been doing and continue to do. So earlier this year, we did a 75-minute training for really the entire NYPD executive staff, risk factors for biased behavior, which gets at these types of issues. That was something that was, I think, very productive and helpful. And then more importantly, even more importantly, something we're rolling out in January of this coming year, department-wide fair and impartial policing training. That's for all employees. You we have a module we've done, a training module about racial profiling and bias-based policing. We've had I think we had 24,000 officers who have been trained on that. I'm not sure I've gotten it at all of the
24,000 officers to date have been trained on implicit bias?
I think it's a video module, racial profiling and bias-based policing, yes.
And how many officers are on the force?
I think we have, uniforms, be around 30,000-ish.
Yeah, total uniform about 33,000.
I don't think your mic is on.
I'm sorry. Uniform, 33,000.
Yeah, and I should say, just to be clear, all of our recruits get training in the academy on this, right? We do training on both policing legally, and we do separate training on policing impartially. We do training on policing in a multicultural society. So everyone's getting this in the academy, and then on top of that, we're talking about essentially either refresher courses or sort of where you're getting at kind of implicit bias issues and sophisticated training about that. So it's very much a work in progress, but it's something that we definitely do, yes.
Okay. So the use of stop and frisk skyrocketed during the Bloomberg administration, and highlighting a central role in the NYPD's policing strategy during that era. Following the Floyd decision, the NYPD drastically reduced the number of stops, decreasing from conducting 685,724 stops in 2011 to 532,911 stops in 2012. To 191,851 stops in 2013, down to 46,787 stops in 2014, 22,000 stops in 2015, and now and reaching a low of 8,947 stops in 21. In recent years, under the administration of Mayor Eric Adams, stop and frisk numbers have consistently increased, reversing prior trends. Do you have and how do you explain that? I mean, that's a significant increase, right? We're recording, so in 23, there were 17,000 stops. In 21, there were 8,900 stops. That's a pretty big jump.
Well,
how do you?
Yes and no. I mean, I think, but the historical perspective you just provided, I think, is very important, right? I mean, you're right. Like looking over, let's say 2 to 3 year time frame, you have seen a significant increase. There's no question about that. Looking at it over a decade plus, you've seen a astronomical decrease. So I think in any sort of real historical perspective, what you're really seeing is a shift in policing and just a really incredible drop in the number of level 3 encounters and the number of stops.
But those numbers have since skyrocketed back up to 17,000.
No, understood. All I'm saying, though, is...
So there seems to be a disruption, right? And whatever trend was occurring that was taking us on a downslide has now, taken us back up.
Yeah.
How do we justify
Councilmember,
that?
I mean, if you look at the crime in 16, 17, it was significantly lower. All right, we have been going up in crime, especially after COVID. So, I mean, our police officers are out there, they're engaged more, they're trying to reduce the crime, they're trying to bring down the shootings. So I think there is a correlation with there being more crime as compared to 16, 17, and 18 versus 21, 22, and 23.
Yeah, and I'll just look. I do see that, and I recognize that stop and frisk was a tool that was used, right, to stop crime or prevent crime from occurring. I get that. I think that it's the way that it's used has shown to be abusive, right? There's been a lot of abuse of power from NYPD officers as it relates to stop and frisk. My son has been, on the receiving end of that, coming out of his building, walking to the store, stops to talk to his friends in front of his own building, gets stopped, right? He's walking, to work, helps a lady to carry her carriage into the building, he gets stopped because he looks like somebody. So it's when it happens enough times and it's no longer a coincidence, right? Then there's something obviously in the universe of policing that is skewed against people of a specific community, a specific identity. And that's the part I think that we're here to learn is how, have we applied those lessons learned, the new policies around stop and frisk to reduce the numbers and to ensure that we're not stopping, young men and women of color just because they live in a specific community, right? And you can, and I can if you tell me, well, council member, the reason that, in this specific precinct is because that's, you had a lot more crime there, then it kind of makes sense, but I don't believe that crime is not happening in other precincts as well. So the fact that the demographics are primarily made up of Black and brown people doesn't look good, right? And so there has to be an explanation for that makes sense to us, right, as legislators, so that, we're better able to work with the NYPD to ensure that, this is not happening, right, that we're not just stopping people. And so that's why I asked a question about implicit bias, because I think that because policing is a difficult job, and, and I've seen it, I work very closely with my officers, and I have no problem holding the NYPD or anybody else to task when I think something is wrong. But I do acknowledge that it is a very difficult job. But I think in the course of that, right, you have to make these decisions in rapid turnaround. Mistakes are often made, and the fact that they're consistently made in communities like mine is problematic. And so I think that what I like to hear from these, interactions is recognition. Like, look, it isn't a perfect system. Right, we're looking at the numbers, and we agree, right, that there is a significantly higher census data for Black and brown people. This is why, all right, or we're trying to figure out the why and change that, because implicit bias, I believe, does play a significant part of those stops. I believe that, our young kids are walking around, with their pants down. They're walking around, as Sammy said, with a book bag that may have a brush, on it, and somebody saw it and, maybe assumed the wrong thing. But these interactions are very traumatic. So it's not, if the arrests are not significant enough, right, that lend to the argument that the stop and frisk is such a valuable tool to the NYPD, then something is going to have to change in the culture of the NYPD in the way that you do this, right? And I think that it would be really nice to kind of hear that from the NYPD as opposed to having legislators force that upon you.
Well, let me just address something.
Does that make sense?
No, I understand. So let me address something, council member. Now, I've been in the department a long time, all right? And I was around for 2009, 10, and 11 when stop, question, frisk was at its highest, all right? It was something where, we had to answer for. We had to answer for why. It wasn't properly used, and there was a lot of pressure with it. We don't do that anymore. I'm the chief of department. I chair CompStat. That is not a question that's asked. I don't want any of my officers to ever think that they have to go out there and stop somebody because there's a certain pressure coming from the top. That is not the case, all right? We ask our officers to go out there and use that intelligently, all right? It's rooted in the Constitution. We want them to use it intelligently. We want them to use it properly. Do we see mistakes? Absolutely. Do we see things that we need to address? Absolutely, all right? In preparing for this meeting, I became aware of some things that I want to go back and take a deeper dive on. But one thing I can assure you is that we do not pressure our officers to go out and do this, all right? We put our officers in places that need help, all right? Places that require help, places that we see crime. That's where we put our officers, and we want them to go out there and be visible and talk to the communities and work with them. And if there's a situation that they have to conduct a stop, I want them to document it, all right? Be truthful about what happened out there. Explain what happened, and maybe we could teach you better. Maybe we say, hey, you messed up, or maybe we say, you did a great job, you prevented something, all right? So this is what we want, and this is what we expect. We'll keep looking at it and keep working on it, because I don't want people to feel that we're doing it just because we're going into a community, just because you're Black or you're brown. That's not what we're pushing out.
Yeah, but do you keep records of, like, in a non-Black and brown community, what the numbers of stop and frisk are, and compare that?
Absolutely. I have stop and frisk for every precinct.
Okay.
For every precinct, I could tell you to stop and frisk. I look at the precincts, I look at the crime, and like I said, the example I use, I looked at the 112, Forest Hills, an area I know. I looked at the 75. I mean, the crime numbers are completely different. We need more cops over there. We need cops to engage. People are being shot over there. People are being...
No, listen, I get that, and I hear that in my precinct council meetings, right? I hear that a lot from especially like a lot of the senior citizens that are sitting in front of benches that are, sometimes having to, throw themselves on the floor because there's gunshots happening. I get that. Like, I want to feel safe in my own community. I want people to feel safe in their own community, but I just don't want there to be an impression that because there are people in my community that, may be committing crimes, that we're all committing crimes. And how do we get to a place where we're not necessarily stopping folks just because they have drooping pants or wearing a book bag that looks like, it may have something in it, when there's no other obvious reason for stopping that person, right? Like, there has to be that, and unless we meet there, we're gonna have this conversation every single year. We're never gonna change because we're doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome.
And I agree with you. We don't want people stopped because of their pants are drooping or the kind of sneakers that they wear. But as you just said, you go to the meetings and you hear this from the people. I've gone to numerous meetings throughout the community, throughout this whole city. A lot of times I go to these community meetings and people are asking me, oh, we want the officers to come to the building because of problems. We want them to come to this corner because of the problems. We want them to do this because of these problems. What do you think they're asking us? They're asking us to come there, to stop people, to challenge people, to move people along. This happens all the time. Even in your district, I've been in some of the developments where they called and said, there are people in here, we're not safe. And we have to go in there and say, hey, do you live here? If you don't live here, you have to leave. This is exactly what our officers are doing. They're conducting a stop when they do that. And a lot of this is based on community complaints. I've been in community meetings all over the city. People ask us to go out there and do this.
People ask me all the time too, but I know better than that, right? And so when people ask me that, I also explain that while yes, we're absolutely right to want to feel safe in our buildings, in our place of residence, in our streets, that there's also a fine line when now we're trampling on people's basic rights, right?
And
to walk the street. And these are young, oftentimes impressionable young, men of color. And that has a long-lasting impact on that individual for many, many more years. I can tell you every interaction that I've had with an NYPD officer, and I haven't even done anything. Like, I've never been arrested. I've never committed a crime. And yet and that's part of the implicit bias, right? Like, it goes both ways.
Absolutely.
Whenever I see a police officer that's interacting in a specific, type of stop, like, I'm nervous. And I tell my husband all the time, do not make eye contact. Like, when we're driving, I tell him, do not make eye contact. Because I've made eye contact with an officer that looks like me, that has stopped me because I looked at him.
Right.
And, and so these things, they continue to happen. And I just, I don't think we're going to get to a resolution today. I think I would love there to be some sort of initiated response from the NYPD that says, like, look, we're looking at this data and you're absolutely right, especially because we have so many people of color at the top. We expect a little bit more because these are our communities that we're talking about. And I'm not saying that everybody's a saint, and I'm not saying that crime is not being committed. Those things are happening. But 97% of the people that live in my community are good, decent people that are going to work every day, that are just trying to live, a decent life. And,
And I agree with you, Councilman, but we could definitely take a better look, and I don't want people to feel that way. We will work on it.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to pass it to Councilmember Joseph.
Thank you, Chair. Something I've always said ever since I was an educator, communities that have resources have less crime. And in your statement earlier, you stated that. And Councilmember Caban also highlighted the need for that. So that's where that is. So we know, as a mom of boys, and my boys get stopped all the time, and there's no excuse for it, right? Whether they're driving my car or not, getting pulled over, put in handcuffs, to say to them, well, you didn't match the description of the car, of the driver, is unacceptable for me. So that's the experience that many of the black men who come here experience, and that's unfortunate. So let's talk about accountability and responsibility. Does the public have access to the How Many Stop Acts data that you collect?
It's posted online, yes.
It's what?
It's posted online, yes.
So if I were to do a survey, how many New Yorkers know that's available online?
So there's certainly, it is true that many New Yorkers may not know about, the How Many Stops Act data that's online, but it is 100% it's available on our website, yes.
So now they heard it on the record here. Have you received any feedback from community members? Have you engaged community members on the How Many Stops Act?
Have I heard, I have not heard directly back from community members, no. I have offered on multiple occasions to meet with advocates and advocacy groups to talk about the How Many Stops Act.
And what was the response?
They have not taken me up on that yet.
And can you figure out why?
I hope they will meet with me about it. I'd like to talk.
It's a trust issue. Just like I don't trust because of my boys when they step outside, I'm worried about them. I'm sure across the city, the parents, and as an educator, I felt the same way about the students that I taught, that coming to school was about the same experience. So that perception has to change, that trust has to be gained, and over the summer I had an incident with Chief Madry. He had to come to the district to apologize to my young people because NYPD came and trampled over my young people at a basketball game. And some of my colleagues would never understand that. You ask young people to work with you. We ask young people to trust them, but yet you come and violate that space. You have to do right. By imposing trauma on young people, we have to right the wrong, right? We have to make it right, right? So maybe that's why they're not meeting with you, because there's no trust. And I told Commissioner Stewart the same thing. He's like, Chair, I create all these great programs, no kids show up. They don't trust you. So you have to build better messengers. And as you're doing this, you have to start talking to young people. How does the NYPD address community concern about racial disparities highlighted in the How Many Stop Act data? How do you talk to community members about that?
So what I would say is, though, I think this is important. We have, for the How Many Stops Act, we have 1/4 of data.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is way too soon to draw any conclusions about that data. I think we need a lot more of it before we draw any conclusions, for good or ill. I don't say that in defense of the department or almost as an advocate. I just say as like, with only 1/4 of data, I don't think you can draw conclusions any which way. I think we're going to get data over time. It'll be quarters. It'll be years, and then I'm sure there will be analyses that are done, sophisticated analyses of that data. I will say that on the level 1 piece, a level 1 encounter, it is fundamentally different than a level 3 Terry stop.
What are the differences? Please explain.
Sure. I mean, a level 1 encounter, it's as a legal matter, right? The person's free to leave. There's no suspicion of criminality, or it doesn't have to be. You just need an objective, credible reason to approach. And most of those scenarios are about talking to victims, talking to witnesses. I think about level ones as being about responding to the community, responding to 911 calls, responding to community concerns. Obviously, when you're talking about level 3, you're talking about enforcement. You are. It's a stop. The person is not free to leave.
But how do you use that data that you've captured to also inform policies on how you're going to do better? Because earlier you talked about patrol guide, training, refreshers course, officers that do not put in their information. How does that happen? You call CCRB. Sure. There's no leader to lead the CCRB right now. So where's the accountability and responsibility?
So I think there are a few different pieces of this. So one, I do want to talk for a minute about compliance stat, which is something that we started earlier this year. It is a major innovation for the department. I think it's going to have a really significant effect on how we do things. There's a joke in the department that if we're serious about something, we create a stat about it. And there's truth to that in the sense that you're gathering data, you're getting executives involved, you're pushing accountability, and compliance stat functions very much like ComStat, right? In the same sense that we have at ComStat, we have COs at the podium being held accountable when there are crime problems in their respective commands. Here, it's about accountability in terms of underreporting, body-worn camera activation, the level 2, level 3 distinction. You have COs standing there being grilled by some of the most senior executives, uniforms in the department, on how they do compliance, how they do oversight. I think that's incredibly important. There's an entire team that's been created in the Chief of Patrol's office that what they're doing, pretty much all day, every day is they're prepping for compliance stat, pulling videos, analyzing videos. We put up a compliance stat, both good videos and bad videos. I think it's actually a really helpful thing. We have all the COs for Borough Command in the room, and we're walking through videos, and we're showing examples of really great policing. And by the way, when I say great policing, it's not just lawful policing, but also that they're talking to people the right way.
And how does that trickle down to communities that are being impacted?
Right, so the idea is that COs are taking this back to their cops, are learning from this because they're seeing what's appropriate and what's not. They're getting feedback from executives of what works and what's not. And they're taking that back to their teams, and they want to do this right. They want to succeed, in the same way they want to succeed in CompStat, they want to succeed in compliance stat. I think it does have an effect. And frankly, compliance stat is a great example of the monitor raising concerns, some of the same concerns that you're talking about right now, and the department being proactive, being responsive. I should say there are many things that we do because the monitor requires them of us, 100%. Compliance, that was something that we came up with. We said, we want to do this. We came to the monitor with it. And we said, hey, we think this would be really important, really helpful. The monitor comes to every meeting, or the monitor or a member of her team. She's come to some herself. Sometimes it's members of her team. But they're at every single one of these meetings. They are giving us feedback. I think it's a very important step. On the discipline piece, as I said earlier, we have a new police commissioner. She is looking at this issue. And I don't want to get ahead of her, but what you are going to see under Commissioner Tisch is a disciplinary system that is fair and that is effective. And that is what you are going to see.
And we will hold you to that. Chair, I'll come in the second round.
Thank you. I'm going to pass it to Councilmember Stevens.
Hello, good afternoon. I just want to start off by saying, Deputy Commissioner, I was texting with groups as we were sitting here. Now you said you reached out to them to meet with them. How many stops? Folks said, I don't know who you reached out to, but I'd be happy to help you connect because I am a problem solver. And if that's an issue, let's make sure it happens because
that's
I
great.
think that it's important we're bringing people in the room together to have real conversations because it's the only way we're ever going to solve anything. So I will be helping you set that up. So don't worry about it. Don't you worry your pretty little face.
Thank you.
And I just want to also say, Chief Madry, you're not lying. People in my community are always asking for more cops. That is, when I'm at the precinct council meetings, that is what I hear often, like, we need more cops, we need more cops. But, you know, and I always re-educate them that we need more resources, right? Like, even if we get more cops, it's going to continue to happen because what happens, poverty is going to drive the crime up. And so we have to make sure that we are infusing the same amount of resources that we are infusing cops. And so I say it all the time, which is why my inspectors love me because I'm like, I'm trying to get you to do your job and not everybody else's job. You are not a social worker. You are not going to do all the things that need to get done. You shouldn't be doing homeless services. None of the things. And so my job is to help you guys get the resources so you don't have to be there, right? So you are correct and you are not lying. And I do want to make sure that that's being said because I hear that all the time. We need more cops. I'm like, is that what we need? Is that going to solve the issue? No, we don't have any community centers. The kids have nowhere to go. Oh, why are they standing in front of the building? Where are they going to go? Who's going to let them come in their program? So I think we have to work together to make sure that we are figuring out how do we get more resources, right? I think, us together should be going to the mayor saying, like, you see these areas, we need more resources. And I know they've tried to do different things with like Saturday night lights and all those things, but as we can see, it's not working the way we want it to work. So then what we should do is go back and say, let's reevaluate it to see what else we could do. And this is why I'm always saying, because I'm the chair of DYCD and ACS, and which is why I'm always saying, well, how do we evaluate that? How do we know it's working? Because if we don't have the data to back it up, then we can't say it's working. And today the data is showing that we are criminalizing certain people. And so that's why for me, it's like, how do we now figure out how to move forward and change this? So the next time we come, we're reporting on how we've changed it and what that really looks like. And so that's how I really want to focus the conversation. And so in the 4-6 precinct, they've had a really bad record of escalating level 1 encounters to more serious offenses. 18% of the level 1 stops led to summonses and 2.6% led to arrests, but 95% of all level 1s stops of Black and Brown Latinos is a higher percentage of stops of 25% self-initiated. And so we're seeing that this is trending up. Can you talk to me about what trainings officers and detectives are getting around conducting level 1 encounters?
So officers don't really get, well, we've gotten training about the How Many Stops Act, it aligns with the How Many Stops Act. When you talk about training.
What's some of those, could you talk a little bit about those trainings too?
Sure. Well, if I may, just in terms of how we rolled out the How Many Stops Act and how we sort of, yeah. So
I don't have a lot of time, so be succinct. I'll be trying to eat up all my time because I see what you be doing.
No, I want to answer your question. In connection with the How Many Stops Act, before sort of July 1, and even after July 1, we did a lot of things, right? We did an operations order, we did an administrative bulletin, we did a legal bulletin about level 2 interaction and consent. We did a training video.
All right, you eating my time.
Okay.
Did you train a video? Okay,
We
all right.
did a training video, and also we've had conversations at the executive level and with groups of COs about the importance of this. In terms of the nature of the interaction itself, though, I do want to say, like a level 1 encounter, you're talking about a cop saying to someone, you know, did you see anything? Did you hear anything? Hey, we got a call about this. Do you know anything about that? Hey, we're looking for this kid. Hey, we got a report of gunshots. Did you hear anything? I mean, those are like your basic level 1 encounters. So, I mean, that's sort of, our cops need to know how to talk to people 100%, but I'm not, and that's incredibly important, but I'm not sure that it's really about like a special training for how to do a level 1 encounter, if that makes sense.
Well, I might differ, so that's where we might differ at, because I think you do need a special training on how to like interact with people, period, right? Because even saying like, did you see something, and those things, sometimes people do need to have additional training or prompts or whatever they might need. And because you ate up a lot of my time, I have another question really quickly, and this is pertaining to the gang database. Could you talk to me a little bit about like how the gang database has improved crime throughout the city? Like how are those things correlating? Because for me, has it like changed dramatically? Does it like help with, like how is it improving policing in New York City?
Right, so the gang database is an intelligence tool, and I do want to say, and I know you're watching the clock, but also there were things that were said before about the gang database that are not true, and I do want to say that just for a second, right? Criminal gang database, there was a DOI report last year. We made major changes to the database in light of that report. We took most of DOI's recommendations, implemented most of those recommendations. Some of what was being described.
Are you notifying people that they are on the database?
We do not notify people. We did say, though, as one of the things is that if someone does FOIL it, we will, consistent with the FOIL law,
Has anybody been removed off the database this last year?
What was that?
Has anybody been removed from the database this last year?
So we have an entire process for reviewing this, right?
No, I'm asking you, how many people have been reviewed from the database this year? If you implemented all these things?
I do not have the data with me, right? Because
Okay, well, you should always, be prepared.
Well,
and if you don't have it
hearing
here,
about investigative
you can
encounters
send
about
it
the
back
gang
to
database.
us in written testimony too. So don't worry, you don't have to. If you don't have it right here, we know how to get in contact with you.
We will get you data on that. We have changed the rules regarding the criminal group database, both in terms of the criteria and documentation. It has changed dramatically.
And what are those changes?
All right, so for example, we've changed the criteria for someone being admitted to being put in the database. Some of what was being described before in terms of, location, that sort of thing, these friendship groups, like that does not, absolutely not. That was something that we changed. That changes in writing. The criteria is about self-admission or.
How many young people have come to you and said, "Hey, I'm in a gang, put me on the database"?
Self-admission when they are being interviewed by detectives.
So they're telling detectives, and I just want to be clear, and I'll wrap it up here.
Yes.
They're telling detectives, "I'm in a gang."
Yeah, are there times when people are being questioned and they admit to gang membership? Absolutely, yes, that happens.
That is very hard for me to believe that they are sitting in interrogation rooms like, "I'm in a gang and put me in a database." That's very hard for me to believe. And maybe it's happening. Listen, stranger things have happened, but I do not believe that if we have about 1,600 to 1,700 people on this database, that 1,600 people have self-identified and said that I'm in a gang.
As you know, I didn't say they all self-admitted, but
you said majority of them.
But it's self-admission and multiple, at least 2 separate witnesses. And do people sometimes, when they're being interviewed by law enforcement, admit to gang membership? The answer to that is yes, absolutely, that happens.
Okay. And they might admit to someone else being on there or something like that. Got it. But again, I think that that hasn't really told me how that has helped improve crime throughout the city. But we can talk more about it, and I would love to hear more about the criteria that have been changed and talk about it because it's still very alarming to me, right? Because the race disparities are, again, it's alarming. And Black and brown people are not the only one in gangs. And that's a problem. And you cannot tell me by any means that it's helping anything other than showing that you are terrorizing one group of people.
I do want to say, though, to say that we're terrorizing people through the criminal group database.
Yeah, I'm terrorized by it because I could be on there. I could feel terrorized by that.
Gangs and crews are real, and sometimes.
I didn't say that they weren't.
And sometimes they hurt people. People get hurt. Sometimes people are shot or killed, and we have to have a way of keeping track of who is in which gangs or crews.
Deputy Commissioner, we are on the same page. I am not saying that we don't have gangs, but it's not illegal to be on a gang. That is not a criminal thing. If you have done something and you have done a crime, I am not saying that that is okay. But if people have not committed a crime, they should not be being surveillanced. That's a problem for me. And so again, this is, to me, is very point blank, period. And I understand you're like, oh, this is a tool. But if the tool is not doing what we need, right? We just talked about data and having evaluations. If it's not doing what we need it to do, then why do we have it? So that's just my take, and we'll continue the conversation, and I'm gonna leave it there, and I'm gonna connect you to the organization so we can talk about how many stops, and we're gonna continue to have this conversation about the database. So set some time up with me. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to pass it to Councilmember Holden.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your testimony, Deputy Commissioner and Chief. I just want to bring up on how many stops. I know you don't have the data yet, but you do have the data on response times and critical response. Could you tell us, since recently, since that law was enacted, is there an increase in the response times?
So the very short answer to that is no. Let me give you a little bit more data about that, though. So I'll pull it up in a second. The response times in the third quarter of 2024 were down slightly. Obviously, there are a lot of factors that go into that, and it's something that the department has been very focused on, and Chief Madry can speak to that. But third quarter response times were down slightly. I think when it comes to how many stops, what we've done as part of our policy is we've given officers the choice. Essentially, they can either, for the level 1 form, they can fill it out essentially in real time, right? You can sort of, as you have each level 1 encounter, you can add to the form and essentially like save the form over the course of the day, if that makes sense. Or you can do it at the end of your tour, based on body-worn camera, based on your activity log, based on your memory. That flexibility we thought was important for a variety of reasons, in part because this is new and we're trying to figure out what works best. Part of it also is obviously depending on the command, the tour, can vary very widely. And there are places where officers are running from one critical call to the next. We didn't want them to have to fill it out in real time. Obviously, if they have the time, then great. But if they don't have the time, they can do it at the end of tour. I think we are seeing a lot of officers doing it at the end of tour, which would explain why you're not seeing an increase in response times. We do have an overtime code for how many stops. So the third quarter of 2024 was about 18,000 hours spent on the form by our police officers. That's about 1.44 million in overtime. So I think you're not seeing it play out in response times. You're seeing it play out.
So, but you'll get criticized for that because of overtime. So it's a no-win situation. Many times I've seen in policing. But I just want to, I've been to for almost 40 years now, going to civic and precinct council meetings. I've never gone to one where they don't want cops, more cops. So, and I don't, Chief, you ever hear that before? Like, go to a precinct council and they don't want cops?
I've been to more meetings than I can ever remember.
Right.
I've never been to one where they ask.
Exactly. Again, but you don't hear that. So you kind of don't hear that. And on the resource level, I just want to talk about something that I proposed, and even proposed legislation, and spoke to the mayor and spoke to the council many times, our city council, that we should open up our schools as areas for recreation for our kids. It's not much money. It's an investment into all our communities, and this should be done in every community around the city. Open up our schools. They exist. They have beautiful gyms, some of them. They have a large area of recreation, both the schoolyards or inside. And yet, every year for the last 3 years in the budget, the mayor said he likes the idea. When he was borough president, he liked the idea. And every year in the budget, it doesn't happen. So that's what my suggestion has been. I have legislation. My colleagues should sign on to that legislation because that does help with the resources of communities where kids are not on the street and they don't get into trouble. But so I think we have to get to, to stop vilifying our police officers or trying to do their job. Like you said, Deputy Commissioner, it is a dangerous job, and they get second-guessed a lot. And I'd just like to ask the chief about, on these encounters, and first of all, level 1 is an encounter, like you mentioned, Deputy Commissioner. It's not a stop, but everybody keeps calling it stop. And you're free to leave, right? If an officer says, wait a minute, I got to ask you a question, and they say, get out of here, they could just walk, right?
Correct.
And so to call it a stop is actually incorrect, and you mentioned that. But resisting arrest, what percent of, like the level 3, let's say you have reasonable suspicion that this person has done something, and in the level 3, how many go south because they resist at least that? They just want to walk away or they try to get away.
Well, I can say this. I don't have the data on resisting arrest. I do have some data here on use of force in connection with level 3 encounter. It's actually quite low. We can definitely provide you with that data, though. We will provide that to you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to pass it to Councilmember Palladino.
Thank you both for being here today. I want to thank my colleague Althea Stevens and my colleague Bob Holden. They brought up a lot of the things that I have here on my paper. I want to know, what percentage of the NYPD is non-white? 40%? 60%, yes. So the implication here made by many of my colleagues is that the police force that's compromised of almost half non-white minorities, Black, Hispanic, Asian, and such, is somehow acting on racial hostility against their own communities. How would you say these accusations by my city council members impact the morale of the NYPD?
What I will say about that, council member, is that you have a lot of men and women in this department who put their lives on the line. They're very selfless. They don't think about their own lives, sometimes their own families, and I think we seen that as Council Member Holden spoke about Officer Jonathan Dilla, March 25th. Last week, I was with the family of Pete Fagoski. I was his commanding officer, and he responded to basically a drug rip and lost his life. And 13 years ago, and it's still, to this day, I think about it every day. The men and the women of this department are selfless. They're not perfect, but they're selfless. They go out there, they're trying their best, and we just need the support of the people of New York, and especially the people of City Council.
I agree with you 100%, because it seems that whenever we get together here for what's supposed to be a safety committee hearing, it always turns a little ugly. And there's no reason for that, because I think we're all here as human beings. And what we want here is the very best for our city, and especially our young people. When your officers patrol a neighborhood, Bob brought this up, would you believe that the residents are generally very happy to see your presence there?
I would say the big portion of the neighborhood, the greater portion of the neighborhood is happy that the officers are there. From my experience going into community meetings all over the city, I've been in community meetings almost in every precinct in this city. People say they want to see the police, they want to work with the police, they want their police to be respectful of them.
That's correct.
We have to acknowledge that, and I demand that from my officers as well, to be respectful of them. But they do want to see the police.
And in my experience as an older person and raising kids of my own and generational, it's been my experience that what you teach at home, you take outside with you. And one of the things I think that needs to be taught more often, both at home and in schools, is to respect the men and women who are brave enough to put on the uniform. And I think if they're taught at a very young age, 3, 5, 7, 9, I think as they grow older, they will respect you and others like you who, like I say, are brave enough to do this. A relationship with our young people is a must, an absolute must. And that's best lessons taught at home and in school. And when they hear this rhetoric that goes on here, both in chambers and outside of chambers, all it does is reinforce a negative towards our police, and I think that really needs to stop. You don't need to come here and be questioned as if you are criminals yourselves, so I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you very, very much for coming here and putting up with what you put up with. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to pass it to Councilmember Carmen De La Rosa.
Thank you, Chief and Deputy Commissioner for being here. I want to bring us back to the data because although the inequities are clear, I think one of the things that is important to note is that if there is a racial bias in a policy, whether the person is racist or not, when they are asked to execute that policy by matter of their job, they're executing a policy that is inherently racist. Not necessarily their intention to be racist, but the policy that they're being asked to execute has racial implications, and we've seen that in the data. So I have a question. In the information we've received, stop, question, and frisk kind of peaked in 2011. Then we saw a historic low in 2021, and now we are seeing an increase once again. What accounts for the increase under the Mayor Adams administration? And that increase from the data that I have in front of me is consistent with the racial inequalities that existed previously. So what accounts for that increase?
I think, like I said earlier, in 2016, 17, 18, we had less crime. So, of course, less crime, less arrest, less contact. We've seen less stops. We've seen 2019, 2020, 21, crime started to rise again. So officers, we had to deploy them to address crime. So with that, of course, there's more contact, more engagement. So doing it properly should be more stops. Documented stops. That's important.
That does cause a little bit of confusion to the general public because the rhetoric that we continue to hear from our city leaders is that crime is down. And so when we say crime is down, but then to justify stop, question, and frisk, crime is up, that causes confusion in people. Can you elaborate on that?
Crime is down because we're driving it down. We're out there doing police work, all right? Believe me, I don't want numbers to go up. I don't want more arrests. I don't want more stop and frisk. To me, that's a bad indicator. It should be less. We want to work in our communities and do less of that. That's not the answer to it. But right now, we're out there, we're deploying, and we're engaging. We're seeing more young people carrying guns. Gun arrests, the last 2 years, record numbers. Something's wrong with that. More guns in our community. Something is wrong with that, all right? We've seen an increase in certain crimes, all right? So when you look at the big picture, crime is down overall, but in certain communities, we're still having challenges. With the community itself, overall crime, maybe certain crimes. So we're still out there addressing this stuff, all right? We need the help.
Okay, let me ask you a few questions regarding level 1 stop. So local law 43 is written and it states the information shall be disaggregated by the precinct where such an encounter occurred and further disaggregated by the following: apparent race and ethnicity, gender and age, the member of the public involved, the factors leading to the investigative encounter, and whether a criminal or civil summons was issued in connection with the encounter, whether the use of force of the incident is as identified in section 14-158 occurred in connection to the encounter, so use of force as well. And the NYPD is presenting the data for each of those categories by precinct. However, we haven't seen the data presented in a way that allows for a detailed analysis of how many of these categories relate to one another. For example, we can't tell how many people of color were stopped at a level 1 for quality of life issues, or how the use of force in these encounters varies based on race and other factors. So that level of detail is important for us to understand what is occurring when we see the data that is presented to us. Will the NYPD commit to making the raw incident level data available for the public in the full interest of transparency?
So we don't have, I don't think, the data that you're describing with regard to level 1 encounters. The way the level 1 data works is we gather it by tour, and again, consistent with the law. And I do think it's important to say we have this new law in front of us.
Agreed.
And we're providing it, and we're 1 quarter in. So we're gathering that, we're providing it. We don't actually gather it in the way I think you're describing. You're describing it, basically gathering it on an encounter by encounter basis, essentially a separate form for every single encounter. We actually don't do that.
Okay.
So we can't give you what we don't have.
Okay, maybe we can work on getting more clarity on the encounters. I just have one kind of follow-up, Chair, if I may. One follow-up, but it's also kind of like more of a statement. You testified earlier, or we heard someone say earlier, that in a level 1 stop, you're able to walk away. And I want to talk a little bit about that, because the reality of the matter is that in communities like mine, if you walk away, there is a consequence, right? And the trust that should exist in communities that we've heard our colleagues talk about dictates that common sense for us as people of color in the city is not to walk away. Because if we walk away, we risk our lives. And I just want to know if there is a actual acknowledgement of that when we talk about what a level 1 stop means. Because I could be stopped and asked a question about whatever. I can't necessarily just walk away. That, I think that people in communities don't feel safe just simply walking away and evoking that right to walk away. And so we should have a conversation about what that looks like.
I'm not here to challenge anyone's lived experiences, all right? Everyone's going to speak. I can speak about my experiences growing up, even now experiences. I'm not here to challenge anybody's lived experiences. I'm here to learn from them and see how we can make things better. I will gladly have that conversation. As we said, we have a new police commissioner here. I'm sure she wants to implement some changes to make sure all our communities are safer, and we'll work with that. We'll work to that.
You're welcome. I do want to know, based on the question that was presented just now, what is the NYPD's practice when an individual attempts to disengage an officer conducting a level 1 stop and leave the scene?
They're free to leave. And just to be clear, if an officer approaches someone at what should be a level 1 encounter, let's say the person walks away and the officer prevents them from leaving, that's a level 3 encounter, period. Right?
As soon as the officer prevents them from leaving.
Yeah, the question is, right, for a level 3 encounter, the question is, does someone reasonably believe that they're free to leave? If they do not reasonably believe they're free to leave, we're talking about a level 3 encounter. So in a scenario in which an officer walks up to someone, say a potential victim or witness, did you see anything, did you hear anything, classic level 1 encounter. If the person just turns and walks away, they have that legal right to turn and walk away. To the extent an officer were, for example, to prevent them from doing that, to grab them, to block them from leaving, without more, that's totally inappropriate. That is an improper level 3 stop. That if they're preventing them from leaving, that is an improper Terry stop.
Are officers ever instructed to follow someone after a level 1 stop?
Instructed to follow someone after a level 1 encounter? I'm not familiar with that. I'm not familiar with that.
You said, are they instructed to follow someone after a level 1 encounter? No, we don't instruct that. Level 1 encounters could be very innocuous, and I use an example as, the level 1 encounters were being introduced. A simple example, I was standing at the marathon, and I saw someone who finished the marathon, and he got woozy and looked like he was about to faint. And I said, "Sir, are you okay?" Technically, I just that was a level 1 encounter by me asking a question, "Are you okay?" And I saw this man who looked like he just ran 26 miles, and he looked like he was getting ready to drop. Technically, asking that question, yeah, I'm supposed to do a report. So sometimes these reports can be very, very innocuous, but letter of the law, we should be filling out a piece of paper.
Is there an official, maybe the way I'm thinking about it, because I understand what you're saying in terms of that if I was an officer and I saw something like that, I would say that it's my duty to make sure that this person is okay. But what I'm wondering is there language that speaks to what a level 1 is? Because I know you said it's like unofficial, but what is there like an official, this is a level 1, now we're required by law to document this? Is there language that, because I think part of the issue that has been brought up is no one who has had the experience in more impoverished communities has ever felt like I could just leave. I've been stopped. Many people saw the stop that I was stopped and I was on the job, and I was actually stopped before then. That was even more egregious. I've never showed the video. Maybe probably would never show the video. Maybe 16 officers came out of 4 different cop cars and stopped me. And I didn't feel like I had the, I mean, it didn't become of anything. You know, everybody turned their body cameras on, but I didn't feel personally like I said, I'm like, no, I'm leaving. I was in my car, I'm leaving, excuse me, move out the way. I've seen, I think most of the people probably have seen social media examples where the interaction, of course, is very negative from the community. Get out of my face, so forth and so on. It almost like escalates, and so the officer has to provide the level of training that they were trained to make sure that they keep a level head. And so, you know, part of it is...
Right. Yeah. I kind of think I understand what you're talking about. I mean, listen, we train officers. We train officers in de-escalation. We talk to them about level 1 encounters and stuff like this. A conversation I had in the office about a week ago, we want to increase our training, more of our roll call training, the 10, 15 minutes our officers have after roll call to address certain scenarios just like this. Again, your lived experiences, you think I can come up to you and ask you something very innocuous and you feel that you're not free to leave. And that's not the case. By law, that's not the case. By law, you can just say, I don't want to talk to you, officer, and walk away. This is something that we have to work on. I mean, it's the police department, the communities, where people understand what it is. If officers approaching you and ask you an innocuous question, you can talk, you don't have to talk, all right? A lot of these innocuous questions, people know that they are questions to help. When the officer says, hey, did you just hear gunshots? People know that the officer's just looking for help. Whether they choose to answer or not answer is, again, up to the individual. But it's something that, you know, we're not going to be able to solve it here, Chair. It's something that we really have to get into communities and work with.
I definitely understand that. The named plaintiff in the landmark case Floyd versus the City of New York was a 28-year-old black man named David Floyd. In 2007, Mr. Floyd was repeatedly stopped and frisked near his home in the Bronx. And at the time, the officer who put their hands into Mr. Floyd's pocket searched under his shirt. These officers were part of the anti-crime unit. This unit had previously been abolished as part of the NYPD settlement that resolved litigation claiming unconstitutional policing. However, in the Adams administration, they created a new neighborhood safety and public safety teams that have faced criticism in that they appear to replicate many of the practices of the former anti-crime unit that stopped Mr. Floyd. So my question is, what types of operations did the former anti-crime unit conduct? How were former anti-crime units deployed? And to what extent did these units utilize investigative encounters or street stops while operating in communities? And can the department identify what was problematic about the former anti-crime unit? I know it was a lot, but
Yeah. So I think one thing I want to correct you on, after the Floyd settlement, anti-crime was not abolished. That's not true. Commissioner Shea abolished the anti-crime unit, I believe, in 2020 or 2019, somewhere in between there. I can't remember the exact year. He abolished the anti-crime unit at the time, just based on, just history, and for whatever reasons he made that decision. We've implemented certain proactive teams, neighborhood safety teams, CRT, because again, this work is important, all right? It's important. It's about saving lives. We definitely revamped it. We put everybody in uniform so there's no confusion. When an officer gets out the car, the person sees the officer in the uniform. Their name is prominently displayed, their shield numbers prominently displayed. We need our officers to go out there and engage. We have people out there carrying guns. We have young people shooting each other, all right? This is no secret. You watch the news, all right? We have people being hurt out there. We need officers that are going to go out there and be proactive, but be respectful. We don't want them to go out there and use any illegal tactics. We don't want them to go out there to harm people. We want them to go out there to be smart, all right? To be intelligent, be patient. A lot of patience involved in police work, all right? Be patient. Understand what the crime conditions are. Understand what the needs of the community are. Listen to the people in the community, because in my experience, the people in the community, they're telling you what the problems are. They do, all right? This is why we create these enforcement units. Very small units. They're not big units. They're small units, all right? And we work with them, and we know they make mistakes, and we try to train them, and we try to make them better, but this is important. We have to be able to go out there and be proactive in enforcement, and if we stop being proactive, I think the results will show immediately, and there won't be good results.
definitely. One of the things that I was thinking about in preparation for our hearing today was that very thing. Part of the issue, of course, in our communities, especially in the more impoverished communities, has been stated, is the resources that are needed, the opportunities that, even Councilmember Holden had brought up about opening up the schools and going to the mayor to ask for those types of resources that are needed. But I'm thinking about some of the, I guess, the trends that have been explained. I'm trying to understand the trends from the perspective of, are we talking about things that could be fixed if we fix poverty? Like, I know, Councilmember Caban, you talked about the differences in the levels of what was happening in schools and the communities and things of that nature. And of course, in more impoverished communities, especially when we talk about what happened during COVID, people who are already in the margins of life now trying to figure out how can they feed their families. And of course, unfortunately, folks had the masks on as well, right? So it was a lot harder to identify folks. I think part of the real push that we should be trying to figure out as a city is, how do we really increase the it's not just the quality of life issues. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of things can be fixed if we solve for poverty, because then the folks in the community, because I've had the same experience in my community. People have said we need officers to show up right next to grocery stores because the grandmothers were afraid to go to grocery stores. This is prior to me becoming a councilman, and when I left the meeting, I was shocked to see officers maybe every 2 blocks, and people were still saying we're afraid to go to grocery stores and things of that nature. But I do know a lot of it is related to poverty in the communities that we're in, the lack of resources, the opportunities, the things that folks find themselves doing trying to survive. I think, and the reason why I'm bringing this up in terms of just a start is the level of sensitivity needed in those communities has to acknowledge the history that happens in those communities. Like, what is this community? What are we going to? You know, oftentimes, I don't want to think that I'm joining a police department because I want to just make sure that I'm safe if I'm a black person, right? Go along to get along, or so, you know, those types of issues. I want to really be able to say that police officers are people who are there to protect and serve. These are guardians of society. And that guardianship is a guardianship that is not always perceived in the best ways in more impoverished neighborhoods, even though we want officers to keep us safe. But that historical piece is there, right? I'm going to pass it to, I know we have a second round coming. Want to pass it back to Councilmember Caban to, yes.
Thank you. So I just want to state for the record that before I ask my questions, that during Councilmember Stevens' questioning, y'all both nodded when she was saying that poverty contributes to crime, and also continued nodded when she talked about the need for more resources in certain communities. Just because, you know, that can't be reflected without stating it on the record, which still rhetorically begs my question as to whether or not you guys asked the mayor about these things. But I want to shift over to asking about ICE. If ICE calls up NYPD about a person that's currently or formerly in their custody and they want to know the person's last known address, is NYPD providing that info?
Could you just ask the question one more time? Let's make sure I understand the question.
Sure. If ICE calls up the NYPD
Yep.
about a person currently or formerly in NYPD's custody,
Yep.
and ICE wants that person's last known address, is the NYPD providing that info?
And if you're talking about anything in relation to civil immigration enforcement, the answer is no, we can't do that.
Okay, and can ICE access the address info on DCJS rap sheets?
I actually don't know what ICE can and can't do on DCJS rap sheets. I just have no idea.
Okay, can you find out if?
I think it's actually a question for ICE. I mean, in other words, you're asking what ICE's capabilities are.
Okay, what info does NYPD share with ICE?
No, so in connection with civil immigration enforcement, we are not allowed to share anything with ICE, and we don't. ICE has a criminal component within it, a criminal HSI, Homeland Security Investigations. They do criminal cases. And as you know, in connection with criminal cases, we are allowed to work with HSI. We do work with HSI on criminal investigations, and city law provides for that. But in connection with civil immigration enforcement, we're not allowed to give anything to ICE, period.
But if a person is fingerprinted in connection with an arrest, right, those prints are shared with federal law enforcement, including ICE.
So again, you know, if you're asking sort of what we fingerprint someone, it goes to DCJS, what the federal authorities have access to, how they access that, you're just asking the wrong person.
Okay. I want to go back to your testimony, and then I will finish early this time, Chair. You testified at the beginning of this hearing, quote, that there has been a significant shift in the nature of policing in this city, correct?
Yes.
And you're right, there has been. Payouts for police misconduct settlements are going up and further burdening taxpayers. Stop-and-Frisk is the highest it's been in a decade, according to NYCLU, lower than the Bloomberg peak of 2011, again, over a decade ago, highest in the past decade. Your previous commissioner had buried more cases of gross misconduct and abuse by police officers than any commissioner ever before, according to ProPublica, and I hope to see a change from Commissioner Tisch. The NYPD is cracking down on freedom of the press and reporters, and that's even according to the New York Post. Dangerous police crashes have skyrocketed, averaging more than one a day at this point, including a chase that killed a cyclist in my district. And the data shows that black and brown people are disproportionately stopped, regardless of precinct, and that still continues to be the case. So I think that you're right. There has been a significant shift in the nature of policing in this city. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Thank you. I'm going to pass it to Councilmember Joseph.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question earlier when you talked about, you saw an uptick in crime among young people. Are you working in partnership with Project Pivot or any other Cure Violence group to make sure that you're addressing the needs of the young people? And where do you see the uptick? And what's being done to address it?
Just overall, you see more shootings, you see more gun arrests, you see more young people being the victims of shootings. And we're seeing this all over the city. Do I work with the violence interrupters? Absolutely. I've been working with the violence interrupters for years. 2011, 2010. I've been probably one of the first commanding officers to really work with them. Still work with them. Just met with a couple of them recently asking to do a little bit more because we see what's going on with the violence. The department itself, what we do for youth, I mean, we have more programs than ever working with youth. We have 2 youth centers now, one in Brooklyn, one in the Bronx, that are open, that we bring young people to. And a lot of our precincts, and something we don't get credit for, in a lot of our precincts, there are officers who are doing things with young people. One of your districts is a 6-7, and you remember what Officer Barry did over there with young people. I mean, she had one of the best programs in the city. Officer Duhaney out in Queens. I can name so many of them who are doing many programs working with young people, all right? But we need to do more because we see young people being hurt at an alarming rate. We just have to get to them, and we need everybody's help to get to them.
What about around Project Pivot? How are you partnering up with them in New York City Public Schools? To also, it has to be interagency. It can't be silo. It has to be interagency, and because the work overlap.
Right. Our Assistant Commissioner of Youth, Alden Foster, he worked with a lot of the different youth organizations, Project Pivot, DYCD. Over the summer, we brought about 1,000 young people into the police department to work, to learn about policing and to get paid for it. He does a lot with a lot of CBOs, with Project Pivot, with DYCD, him, the Community Affairs Bureaus, and a lot of our youth officers. They do a lot of different programs.
We'll talk online. I would love to see what those programs look like, and where, I'm sure if I were to talk to any violence interrupter group, I'm sure there's a lot of gaps that can be filled in when it comes around to young people. And one of the things we also see is how are you engaging young people? Because we always tend to say, oh, we're doing this for the young people, but we never engage them in conversation, and I'm big on making sure young people are at the table, because we always want to do things for them, but not with them. How are we engaging young people to make sure that their voices are heard? Because their needs, I can go and say, as the education chair, oh, this is what young people need, and turn around and they're like, nah, chair, that's not what we need. This is what we need. How are you engaging young people in this conversation?
I would really have to drill down to the commanding officers and what they do in each precinct, because every precinct does something a little different. One thing I stress to the commanders and to the cops is they're a group of young people who you don't really need to talk to. They'll come to the precincts, they'll come to the programs, they'll join the Explorers. You know, it doesn't require a lot. We really have to go to the corners and talk to the young people who don't want to deal with us.
The young people we haven't seen, the young people that have not attended school when they should be in school. Those are the young people we need to target. Those are the young people we also need to bring to the table to have conversations with as to what's happening. Is it employment? Is it housing security? What are you facing that needs you, that drives you there? Because when I visit my young people, unfortunately, my portfolio goes all the way into East River Academy. It's the no engagement, nothing happening in communities to keep them engaged.
I agree, and we need to work together and work in our communities to do more of that. We need to keep the young people engaged. what we've been seeing in the last few years is not good. And we're just seeing the gun violence rising. We're seeing crime rising. We're seeing, young people, the victimization being rising, and we need to get in front of that.
And how do the guns get into the hands of the young people? $1 million question.
I wish I had the answer, because we're seeing more gun arrests with, and with young people, and it's alarming. It's alarming. 14-year-olds, 13-year-olds carrying guns, bringing guns to school. 9 guns.
Something along the way is happening. That's why they're bringing it to schools. Are we creating safe passages for young people to go to and from schools? Are these things happening for young people to want to go to school, get there? Because they don't bring them into the school buildings.
Oh, yes, they do.
They do?
we removed 9 already
this week?
This school year. But we do have safe corridors. Every precinct is required to have a safe corridor for the young people. Transit, they're required to have safe corridors as well. That's part of our plan, to work with young people. But we're just seeing the uptick, so we need some more help.
And how are we using restorative justice to also work with young people? Everything doesn't have to be punitive.
I 100% agree. Again, we'd have to drill down to the YCOs. We have to really talk to them what they're doing in individual precincts. What precincts have programs? Back when I was in Brooklyn as a commander, we had a youth court right there in Brownsville that we were using with a judge, another community person. It was good. Unfortunately, we lost the court, but again, it's something that we need to do. All right, so I'll talk. The precinct commanders will really have the answers in terms of what are they doing in their individual precincts and how they're working with young people.
Do the CEOs have a youth advisory group that they meet with young people to talk to?
Yes, we do have youth councils. We have youth councils. We have our explorers. We took a hit with COVID. We lost a lot of young people, something I just spoke about recently at a meeting that we got to get back out there to bring in the young people back to the Explorer program. But all the precincts have youth councils.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you as well. Thank you all. That concludes this part of the hearing. We will begin with the public testimony next. This is the first. Yeah, go right into it. I now open the hearing for public testimony. I want to remind members of the public that this is a government proceeding and that decorum shall be observed at all times. As such, members of the public shall remain silent at all times. The witness table is reserved for people who wish to testify. No video recording or photography is allowed from the witness table. Further, members of the public may not present audio or video recordings as testimony, but may submit transcripts of such recordings to the Sergeant at Arms for inclusion in their hearing, for the hearing record. If you wish to speak at today's hearing, please fill out an appearance card with the Sergeant at Arms, and wait to be recognized. When recognized, you will have 2 minutes to speak on topic. That's 2 minutes to speak on the topic of bills that were considered today. If you have a written statement or additional written testimony, and you wish to submit that for the record, please provide a copy of that testimony to the Sergeant at Arms. You may also email written testimony to testimony@council.nyc.gov or other email address within 72 hours of this hearing. Audio and video recordings will not be accepted. So I'll now call the first panel, and that would be Jermaine Thompson, Tatiana Hill, and Mauricia Harry. Thank you. You may begin in whichever order. I always say ladies first, but
yeah, I got it. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Jermaine Thompson. I'm here to speak about the critical role of the community liaison in the reform process related to New York City's Police Department's stop, question, and frisk practices and trespass enforcement. On December 16th, 2022, I was appointed by the Honorable Annalisa Torres by the Southern District to be the community liaison. This position is essential for ensuring that voices of those impacted by these practices are heard and integrated into the reform process. The objective of the community liaison, also known as OCL, is to engage in community, particularly those who have been directly affected by NYPD's practices, offering them more opportunities to provide input and share their experiences. By working with community organizations and stakeholders, OCL can develop greater opportunities for dialogue and feedback. This information is then shared with the federal monitor team and the courts, informing them the assessments of city compliance with the court's remedial order in the Floyd, Davis, and Ligon cases. Community input is vital. It ensures that the perspectives of the experiences of community members are considered in assessing the NYPD's practices. This includes addressing concerns around stop, question, and frisk practices, trespass enforcement, and racial bias. OCL's role is to seek, receive, and organize these concerns, making sure that they are communicated effectively to the monitor. The independence of my role from the monitor and the other parties ensures unbiased communication. OCL is not an advocate for any party, but a conduit for the community voices, ensuring that the monitor team regularly hears from a diverse set of community voices. The diversity is crucial for understanding the full impact of NYPD's practices and determining compliance within the court's orders. OCL has been tasked to develop a community engagement plan, conduct surveys, public forums, and meeting to gather feedback. OCL is about building relationships with community organizations, tenant associations, faith-based institutions, youth organizations, and most importantly, those affected by stop, question, and frisk practices. The input gathered will provide context for the monitor's assessment, helping to identify issues or pathways that need further examination. Feel free to cut me off. This is a lot.
The bell has rung.
Yeah.
So
Since the beginning of 2024, we have connected and reached out to 238 organizations and 37 public officials. With these connections, at the end of the third quarter of 2024, we have completed 262 info sessions citywide, which are workshops designed to inform people about the levels of encounters we've been hearing about all day today, and a host of outreach meetings. We have been involved in tenant association, public forums, and various conferences nationwide. We also urge community members we also engage with community members via social media and our websites, Office of the Community Liaison across the board, which also gives community members an anonymous platform to share information about their experiences. Through our reporting to the monitor team in the courts.
If you could wrap up.
Yeah, I'll wrap it up right now. Through our reporting from the monitor team in the courts from the community shared with us, we have discussed a number of significant issues, one being issues around body-worn cameras and the inconsistent activation by officers during community interactions. Community members have repeatedly expressed concerns about officers activating their body-worn cameras unless prompted by the public. And I'll yield back from there.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Tatiana Hill. I'm the senior organizer, and I primarily organize in Brooklyn, New York for our office. So I'm going to talk more about our public education where Jermaine left off. So the info sessions, we basically go to communities that are most impacted by NYPD Stop-and-Frisk based on the data on NYPD's website. That data proves that many of these neighborhoods are policed at a higher rate than others, and therefore they are the ones that we want to interact with to find their feedback on police interactions. Those may be encounters as well as stops, which was talked about earlier. The public education is really necessary. We find that a lot of people in our communities don't know the laws, the policy and procedure of NYPD, so they're not able to name if their rights are being violated during these stops, and therefore they're not able to give feedback to us or other agencies such as CCRB. So when we do these info sessions, it changes the dynamic a lot in the neighborhoods and communities that we work with, because now people understand where their rights have been violated legally, not just in the sense of how they feel in that moment, but according to the law and the Constitution. So once we educate these groups, we now are able to collect feedback, and that is the largest part of our work. Our office reports directly to this, the judge mentioned, Honorable Annalisa Torres, and she is overseeing this whole lawsuit for stop and frisk. So she's able to implement changes currently as well as in the future in the larger process of reform. So it's really important that people who are most impacted by policing are able to give their feedback on what they would like to see change in this policing system. I primarily work in neighborhoods such as Bed-Stuy, Brownsville, Crown Heights, Flatbush, Canarsie, Bushwick, Fort Greene, and East New York. We do know that these neighborhoods are more heavily policed than others because of the data NYPD provided. We attend events that elected officials have, as well as collaborate with them to educate their constituents. We want to do more of those with your staff as well and other city council members. We also have attended NYPD events such as community council meetings. So we do hear both sides of the stories on how people see police and view them and what they would like to see change. Our feedback is collected from all neighborhoods, all people, and all views on policing. But we do know that more neighborhoods are impacted more negatively than others, and we speak on that throughout our work and our reports. I'll now pass it off to my colleague, Mauricia, and I'll close and just say that we're also working on feedback sessions where people specifically can talk about their feedback after we've done these info sessions for the last year and a half.
Thank you.
All right, so good afternoon. My name is Mauricia Harry. I am the Manhattan Community Organizer for OCL, and today I wanted to just cover the feedback that I've received, some of the areas of concern. And most of community throughout all 5 boroughs, and Manhattan is included, has expressed a decrease in regular blue and white patrol stops and an increase in specialized units. These increases are taking place in NYCHA, schools, and also vehicle stops, as it is heightened in lieu of street stops. The CRT team, we know that their role is to respond to quality of life issues. However, based on the feedback, these teams are more present and has expanded throughout all boroughs using enforcement tactics that result in negative policing. The community is afraid of making it out alive from these unconstitutional stops and searches based on the way that the officers jump out of unmarked vehicles, offensive language, and use of force. Our office continues to receive videos from the CRT team referring to them as the 10 khaki pants crew. As per the OIG report released last month, there is an opportunity and a gap in transparency around the formation, staffing, and structure of that unit, as well as the NST response team. Our monitor team last year had released a report stating that they were contributing to the biggest amount of disproportionate stops. And amongst these 2 units, we have collected feedback on the Right to Know Act as gaps with officers identifying themselves and body cam usage. The community asks for consistency and equality when it comes to discipline and accountability related to stop, question, and frisk because of the threat these units place in the neighborhoods. And that's what I got for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I have a question. Jermaine, you mentioned body-worn camera activation as a community concern. Can you say more about what OCL is hearing about body-worn camera usage?
Yeah, sure. So we receive a lot of feedback in general, but around body-worn cameras, we've seen videos of community members having to remind officers that their body-worn cameras are not activated. So, say for instance, I could cite our last report that we put out, It was a group of individuals in Brownsville in a night share housing. They was out at night hanging around. 4 NST officers approached them. None of them had their body-worn cameras on. Community members start yelling, why y'all approaching us, why y'all surrounding us, please cut your body-worn cameras on. So we see instances like that throughout the city, and that's why I chose to highlight that today, because it's a concerning issue for community.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it. So I'll now call Michael Sasiski. Alan Abraham. And Brittany McCoy. Okay, you may begin.
Great. Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. My name is Michael Sazitsky, Assistant Policy Director with the New York Civil Liberties Union and a steering committee member of Communities United for Police Reform. The NYCLU has been analyzing stop-and-frisk data for years because of the critical importance of being able to identify trends that the data reveals in unconstitutional policing practices. And now to that data, we are able to add a more comprehensive view with the data that we're getting from the How Many Stops Act. So I want to give just a few top lines on some of what we saw from our analysis, of course recognizing that this is just 1 quarter of data without much to compare it to as a baseline. But the data really showed that disparities do exist at all levels of police investigative encounters in New York City. 68% of level 1s reported during that quarter targeted Black and Latinx New Yorkers, and 86% of level 2s involved people who were Black or Latinx, and those disparities largely mirrored what we see in level 3 stop-and-frisk data. In the level 1 category, notably the second largest category of justifications for L1s in that data set were just listed as other. Given the sheer volume of encounters that we're talking about nearly 79,000 interactions that aren't given a clear justification. It's a point for further oversight and investigation as to whether or not there are more clear lines that could be drawn there, more clear categories that could be made, because that's a lot of encounters to not have any justification listed for with just that broad other category. There were a few kind of eye-popping numbers that jumped out from our analysis, some of which Councilmember Stevens asked about earlier, including in the 46th precinct in the Bronx, where more than 1,300 summonses were recorded as being issued in connection with level 1 encounters, which was by far the largest in that data set, and is something that is really demanding of closer oversight and an explanation from the NYPD as to how that precinct is driving so much enforcement from the lowest level of interactions. I'll just quickly note some limitations, and this was discussed as well. We really need to have a clearer sense of incident level information on these level 1 and level 2 encounters, because that's what's really necessary to get at whether or not there are real trends or disparities and potential bias in how interactions are playing out. We have data that's broken down that can tell us how many Black people were stopped in a given precinct, how many of those level 1 encounters were a radio run, how many were self-initiated, how many were for a quality of life issue. But we can't link those things together. We can't say that there were this many Black people who were stopped in a precinct on an officer-initiated encounter for a quality of life issue. And getting that level of detail is going to be what's really critical for identifying whether there's bias, whether there are other trends that we should be paying more attention to. So we would encourage the NYPD to upload that information into future reports or the city's open data portal. And if they're not collecting that data in a way that easily allows for that analysis, we should work to find ways to make sure that we are getting that level of detail going forward, because that is going to be what's really critical to countering and pushing back on any unlawful or unconstitutional policing that's happening at those levels. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Chairperson Salam, My name is Brittany McCoy, and I'm the Managing Director of Policy at the Bronx Defenders. I'm also a member of the Communities for United for Police Reform. 12 years ago, in 2012, as a high school student in the Bronx, I wrote an essay about how stop and frisk violated our constitutional rights. It would take a few more years, along with lawsuits by the Bronx Defenders and others, for the courts to declare as such. But back then, it was obvious. I watched classmates, some as young as 14 years old, stopped and searched for doing nothing more than walking to the gym after school, or to the corner store, or to basketball games, or simply just standing outside in our neighborhood. It was rarer to hear that a friend hadn't been stopped. After watching this happen to my friends for months, I used a class speech assignment to channel my thoughts, writing, is it really worth the intrusiveness and embarrassment for New Yorkers to go through this every single day just for police officers to find something in less than 1% of cases? This question unfortunately still stands. That speech was the beginning of my career in advocacy, and now, 12 years later, I sit before you as the Managing Director of Policy for the Bronx Defenders. Yet, I'm still fighting against these same practices. Even though we know stop and frisk doesn't keep our communities safe, the NYPD continues to use these degrading and unconstitutional tactics every single day. And although I will never stop fighting for my community, I would love for the NYPD to just follow the law. The How Many Stops Act promises transparency and accountability, and although the initial data we have indicates the NYPD is not complying with the law, it's still enough to confirm what our clients tell us, that stop and frisk continues. At the Bronx Defenders, where we represent nearly 20,000 people every year, we see the ripple effects of these stops. A mother detained and missing work because of an unnecessary stop, a teenager's future derailed because a false arrest leads to suspension or expulsion. The council must hold the NYPD accountable, but this is also a moment to demand more, to reimagine public safety as something built on trust, dignity, and opportunity, not surveillance, punishment, and fear. We know what works. Investment in affordable housing, education, and mental health services, and youth programs create safety and stability. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to Public Safety Committee Chair Salam and council members who are concerned about the NYPD's use of stop and frisk and other investigative encounters. My name's Alan Abraham, and I'm speaking on behalf of Communities United for Police Reform. We're an unprecedented campaign to end discriminatory and abusive policing practices in New York that's been operating for over a decade. The partners in this campaign come from all 5 boroughs and from all walks of life and represent many of those unfairly targeted by the NYPD. As Judge Shenlin noted in her August 2023 remedy opinion, nothing can replace the unique and vital expertise of directly impacted communities, and whether reforms are viewed as legitimate by our communities is of primary importance. The How Many Stops Act is now the law of the land, and although it's only 1/4 of data, we're already seeing the continued targeting of Black and brown communities in police-civilian encounters, and there are clear racial disparities between which communities are subject to level 1 and 2 encounters. It's unacceptable that Black and Latin New Yorkers make up 68% of level 1 encounters across NYPD precincts, even though they're only half of the city's population. This discrepancy is even more egregious when it comes to level 2 encounters, where Black and Latin New Yorkers make up 87% of the total encounters. This data shows exactly why HMSA was passed in the first place. Without full transparency, these racist policing practices would continue in the shadows. Police transparency and accountability are more important now than ever, given the current mayoral administration. Since taking office, Mayor Adams, a recently indicted former police officer, and NYPD have systematically worked to dismantle accountability and oversight. This ranges from his failed attempts to block HMSA, his funding cuts to CCRB, and his failure to address the fact that his former commissioner tossed out over 400 misconduct cases, including stop and frisk abuses, without even looking at them, and proceeded to weaken the NYPD discipline matrix just days before submitting his resignation. It's a staggering cycle of corruption. It's clear that the NYPD and the mayor put the protection of the police ahead of the protection of everyday New Yorkers. Until the NYPD is fully conduct, abuses of power will continue. Let's wrap it up. Together, all these factors call for the city to transform its approach to public safety and minimize reliance on law enforcement so that we can maximize investments in services and infrastructure for our communities that actually promote safety. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd I'd now like to call Andrew Case and Kimberly Saltz.
Good afternoon. I'm Andrew Case, supervising attorney at Latino Justice Pearl Deaf. Is that better? Yep. Good afternoon. I'm Andrew Case, supervising attorney at Latino Justice Pearl Deaf, member of CPR, and one of the many attorneys on the stop-and-frisk litigation with the Federal Monitor. The federal court in the stop-and-frisk litigation wants to hear from you and your constituents about the Monitor's discipline report that was issued in September. That report is 503 pages long, but thankfully the plaintiffs' group have put together a 5-page summary of its findings. I've distributed those. I've given Josh the link to that. It is on the Latino Justice website and the website for every group that is involved in the monitorship. In 2013, the court ordered the NYPD to improve discipline, and that order included the line that the changes, quote, must include increased deference to credibility determinations by the CCRB. The report shows that has not happened. For example, between them, P.O. Dervant Williams and P.O. Asan Safar have been the subject of 23 CCRB investigations. The agency has substantiated 12 allegations against them. Their misconduct cost the city $650,000, and when the CCRB again found they'd convicted a bad stop, a deputy commissioner for trials lowered the discipline, saying, quote, neither respondent has a disciplinary record. The report details the career of a deputy inspector we have identified as William Taylor, who over the course of 2 years was the subject of 11 CCRB investigations and 4 lawsuits, who kept getting promoted, was never punished, and retired without receiving any discipline. The discipline report is full of this. Officers are fully excused for misconduct, and no officer has ever, according to the report, or rarely been disciplined for solely an illegal stop and frisk. The report said that in response to that court's order from 2013, the NYPD is in clear defiance of the opinion in Floyd. The court would like you and your constituents to respond to it about what to do about the NYPD's failure to discipline and its failure to abide by a decades-old court order. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kimberly Saltz. I'm a law fellow at the Legal Defense Fund, which is also a member of Communities United for Police Reform. Thank you for this opportunity to testify. Today we want to bring to the Council's attention that the same people targeted through the NYPD's unconstitutional stop and frisk practices are also subjected to the NYPD's racially biased gang policing practices. The NYPD's criminal group database, or gang database, labels more than 16,000 city residents as members of so-called street gangs and youth crews. Under the guise of what it calls precision policing, the NYPD has subjected the people in this database, primarily Black and Latino teenagers and young adults, to sustained surveillance and harassment. The gang database has become a mechanism for continuing the unconstitutional stop and frisk practice of using race as a proxy for crime. 99% of people in the NYPD gang database are Black and/or Latino, and less than 1% of people in the database are white. Entry into the gang database is not tied to actual criminal activity. Instead, the NYPD uses broad, vague, and subjective criteria, such as the colors a person wears or their use of undefined symbols on social media, to label them as gang members. Under these criteria, many New Yorkers who have never committed a crime could be designated as gang members. In our written testimony, we provide research from our Thurgood Marshall Institute that shows that after Portland and Chicago eliminated their gang databases, there was no statistical increase in reported crime. These findings suggest that gang databases do not reduce crime, nor do they improve public safety. It underscores why New York City must eliminate its gang database. To that end, we strongly urge City Council to abolish the gang database through taking up and passing Intro 798 to end the unjust surveillance of a select group of New Yorkers. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd now like to call Karen Teff, Anya Wingstock, and Jacqueline. That's a B? Oh, Botstigan.
Good afternoon, Chair Salam. My name is Karina Teft, and I'm an attorney at the Legal Aid Society's Cop Accountability Project. At the Legal Aid Society, we see the profound harms of NYPD's persistent racist tactics, including the gang database and unlawful stops and frisks. I'm one of the many lawyers involved in the Floyd, Davis, and Lagon lawsuits in which a federal court found that NYPD's use of stop and frisk and racial profiling is unconstitutional and placed NYPD under a federal court monitorship. Over a decade has passed since that finding, and still the NYPD is not and has never been in compliance with the Constitution. Both unlawful stops and the sheer volume of stops have been trending up since 2021. In the first half of 2023, over 30% of documented frisks and searches were unconstitutional. And bad as they are, these numbers don't account for the significant number of stops that NYPD never reports. The monitor's audits of officer body-worn camera footage showed that in 2023, only 59% of stops requiring stop reports were documented. Black and brown New Yorkers bear the brunt of these unconstitutional stops. And while the number of stops have declined between 2013 and 2022, racial disparities remain the same. Over 80% of people stopped each year were Black and Hispanic, and today that rate is even higher, as you have pointed out, Chair Salam. Central to these persistent constitutional violations is NYPD's failure to discipline officers for engaging in unlawful stops, frisks, and racial profiling. These issues were examined in detail in a recently published court-ordered report on the NYPD's disciplinary system. The report found that officers rarely, if ever, receive any discipline for stop and frisk-related misconduct, even when the Civilian Complaint Review Board finds that the officer committed the misconduct. The report attributes this disturbing lack of accountability to many factors, but in our view, the primary barrier to accountability is the police commissioner's final authority over discipline, which often means that officers get no discipline at all. You may know the quote, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." In this case, culture eats policy for breakfast. The law is rendered meaningless as long as the police commissioner continues to facilitate NYPD's culture of impunity by refusing to discipline officers, even when confronted with clear evidence of misconduct. Without fundamental structural changes to NYPD's discipline system, that culture simply will not change. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I'll direct you to Legal Aid's forthcoming written testimony that expounds on these issues in greater detail.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Salam. My name is Anya Weinstock. Thank you for organizing this important hearing. I'm an attorney with the Surveillance Technology Oversight Project. We're a New York-based nonprofit that advocates and litigates against discriminatory surveillance. We heard extensively today about how stop and frisk continues to harm New Yorkers. I'm here to testify about how every day a growing number of NYPD technologies are replicating the exact same injustices in a digital form of stop and frisk. The NYPD's vast surveillance network includes sprawling databases, nearly 100,000 cameras, social media monitoring software, predictive policing analytics, historic NYPD crime data, and countless other monitoring tools, including the gangs database. Even worse, this data is then pushed out to every officer's phone, giving tens of thousands of officers the power to access this data and giving officers the pretext for to unconstitutionally stop someone. These systems are riddled with error and racial bias, replicating the violence of stop and frisk. One such technology is ShotSpotter, which is a dangerous driver of discriminatory stops. ShotSpotter is a notoriously error-prone tool that claims to detect gunshots, but it's actually incorrect 90% of the time. And when alerts go off, when a ShotSpotter alerts go off, this gives a pretext for NYPD officers to enter a neighborhood to try to find the shot, and this leads to discriminatory stops. So in the worst case scenarios, a ShotSpotter alert can even lead to to lethal force being used. And in Chicago, there was a 13-year-old, Adam Toledo, who was killed by police because of a false ShotSpotter alert. In New York City, ShotSpotter has led to police stops and harassing individuals who are legally on the street and not doing anything wrong. ShotSpotter is just one example of the countless flawed technologies, including automated license plate readers, including the gangs database, which we heard about, that are error-prone, racially biased, and concentrated in communities of color that lead to discriminatory stops. In our written testimony, we highlight some of the bills that we urge you to support to mitigate the abuses of these technologies. And so we are calling to abolish the gangs database, to abolish the use of ShotSpotter, for New York City to join the growing number of cities that has canceled contracts with ShotSpotter, and to pass resolutions against technologies that lead to discriminatory and ineffective and harmful stops. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My name is, excuse me, my voice is almost gone at this point. My name is Jackie Gazdiggy, and I'm Supervising Policy Counsel at Brooklyn Defender Services. I've been a public defender for 15 years, and I want to thank the committee, the Public Safety Committee and Chair Salam for the opportunity to address the council about New York City Police Department's use of stop-and-frisk and other investigative encounters. Public transparency is an essential measure for holding the NYPD accountable for the discriminatory and abusive policing practices they employ. These practices criminalize and harm New Yorkers, disproportionately Black and Latino New Yorkers, LGBTQIA+ New Yorkers, and New Yorkers experiencing housing insecurity. Discriminatory and abusive policing practices make all New Yorkers less safe, and in order to make our city safer for all our community members, the City Council must take action now to ensure greater transparency and accountability. The Federal Monitor Report, which we've already talked a lot about today, indicates the NYPD is moving in the wrong direction, conducting more unlawful stops, more unlawful frisks, and more unlawful searches. The gang narrative is used to justify even more aggressive stops, summonses, arrests, and surveillance than before stop and frisk was declared unconstitutional. In the last several years, thousands of New Yorkers have been swept up in so-called gang raids or takedowns, nearly all of them Black or Latino. The City Council must move to eliminate the gang database and pass Intro 798, which would abolish the NYPD gang database altogether. Public defenders usually become aware of police misconduct in connection with an encounter that results in arrest. It is only after an arrest that someone is brought to court and speaks with their attorney about what happened to them. The vast majority of police-citizen encounters that do not result in arrest go unreported or are overlooked. That is why data from the How Many Stops Act is critical. Our hope is that this data will assist the city and the public in monitoring and regulating the actions of the NYPD. The ever-increasing budget of NYPD is also a concern. You already heard my colleague talk about ShotSpotter technology. That technology has a $54 million price tag and absolutely does not work. It also provides technical justification for disproportionate deployment to Black and Latino neighborhoods to stop, frisk, and harass New Yorkers when that technical alert is neither accurate nor valid. As defenders, we see how Black and Latino New Yorkers are disproportionately targeted for stops and arrests, and how individual officers who engage in racist, bias, or hateful behavior remain on the job. We cannot allow these biases to continue to entangle New Yorkers in the criminal legal system. Thank you.
Thank you. If anyone here wishes to testify but has not had their name called yet, please go to the back of the room to fill out the witness slip. After this panel, we'll be moving to testimony on Zoom. So next, I'd like to call Veronica Liventhal. This is in the room. Veronica Liventhal, Malin Gerard, Marquise Jenkins. You may begin.
Good afternoon. My name is Veronica Leventhal, and I am a social worker with the Legal Aid Society's Adolescence Intervention Defense Project. We help young people navigate their felony cases in the youth part of Supreme Court. My clients are all teenagers. Most of them live in the same neighborhoods in Brooklyn, and none of them are white. I'm here today to speak out against NYPD's use of stop and frisk and the gangs database, both of which actually contribute to increased criminality. By utilizing these dragnets, the NYPD criminalizes people, including children, based on where they live, how they look, and the color of their skin, without any consideration of whether they in fact committed a crime. Kids as young as 12 are targeted, harassed, and searched based entirely on their external appearance. The impact this can have on a child's sense of self is profound. If an adult is telling you every single day that you are a hazard to your community and continually, aggressively stopping and searching you, it can severely damage your psyche. And what's more, it permanently hinders your faith in the police to keep you safe, making you less likely to seek their assistance in crisis. I personally have witnessed the 73rd Precinct repeatedly abuse their power to subjugate the children of Brownsville. Our children need guidance and support, and instead the 73rd illegally stops, searches, and uses violence to arrest them. I cannot count the number of times I've seen a child with cuts and bruises all over their bodies, thanks to those sworn to serve and protect us at the 73rd. The murder of Jordan Neely drove me to testify here today. It haunts me because I worry it has now defined who in this city constitutes a criminal, who is categorized as a threat to our safety, and who is not. I know my clients. They are not just reflections of the worst day of their lives, and they do not deserve the dozens of illegal searches they endure at such young ages. I wonder if they would have even been arrested if they weren't in the racist gang database, if they weren't already targeted. I'm asking this council to end this unchecked abuse of stop and frisk and the racist gang database by passing Intro 798. But I'm also asking you to simply talk to the kids in our communities, to hear their experiences directly from them, and then to invest in their communities, in resources for our children, rather than in police and jails. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Salam. My name is Mylana Gerard, and I serve as the coordinator of youth initiatives at the Bronx Community Justice Center, an initiative of the Center for Justice Innovation. I am also here today representing the Gangs Coalition. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. Ample research shows that the practice of stop and frisk continues to harm vulnerable communities' relationships with the police. A study of young people living in highly patrolled, high-crime areas in New York City found that 88% of young people believed residents of their neighborhood did not trust the police. The use of stop and frisk is deeply racialized and disproportionately impacts young people. 9 of the 10 precincts with the highest stop rates have been in predominantly Black and brown neighborhoods. In the last 2 decades, 18 to 24-year-olds were stopped at a rate of 2,070 for every 1,000 residents in the same age group. New Yorkers between the ages of 15 and 17 were stopped at an even higher rate, 2,127 stops per 1,000 residents. Stop and frisk is being used to populate the NYPD's gang database, creating another deeply racialized tool with 99% of people in the database being Black or Latino. This hyper-surveillance has resulted in children as young as 11 being added to the database, marking them for life as they cannot be removed once added. No criminal conduct whatsoever is required to be identified as a gang member. At the Bronx Community Justice Center, our SOS team, which works to disrupt incidents of violence and provide positive youth mentorship, may unknowingly be on the gang database with no way of being removed. Participants in our programming report that activities as simple as getting food at their neighborhood deli or greeting a childhood friend is enough to have them placed in the database. Participants living in NYCHA say that they are regularly targeted for the database simply as a result of where they live. Like the stop and frisk narrative, gang affiliation is defined so broadly that NYPD can capture any neighborhood or individual they deem suspicious. Residents deserve to feel safe in the communities they reside in. Over-policing and surveillance conducted through methods such as stop and frisk and the gang database fracture trust and disproportionately harm young people and people of color. Community programs developed in partnership with residents empower young people, providing them with an abundance of tools and resources to flourish. We urge the council to leave broad strokes policing behind, relying instead on tailored programming that suits residents' needs. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. We will now move to panelists on Zoom. Please wait for the Sergeant at Arms to announce that you may begin before delivering your testimony. We will start with Tanisha Grant.
We're ready?
Starting time.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Salam and Public Safety City Council Committee members. Thank you for this hearing. My name is Tanisha Grant, and I am the Executive Director of Parent Support in Parents New York and Moms United for Black Lives New York City. I am also a member of the Davis Roundtable on NYPD policing and have been for more than 2 years. I was one of the people, Chair, that helped hire Tremaine Johnson, and he's doing an amazing job. I live and serve the community of Washington Heights and Harlem. Our reality is that Stop-and-Frisk wears heavy on our communities for generations. This unlawful practice has been used continuously and continues to be used to unlawfully search and lock up our loved ones. In recent years, the practice of Stop-and-Frisk has returned. We, the people, fund the violent actions through our taxes. We know all, I'm sorry, I lost my pace. In recent years, the practice, we know all the ways Stop-and-Frisk violates community members' lawful rights. Our recommendations are as follows. Stop funding the police and give our communities the resources we need to thrive. Too much money is focused on criminalization of Black and Brown communities. Instead of innovative and fully funded programs and opportunities, we again and again are attacked and told that our personal lived experience with police does not matter. I myself have been unlawfully frisked in the street trying to visit a friend. She lived in a building the police deemed a drug spot. They pulled me out of my car, pulled out my bra, made me take my shoes off in the middle of the street, all because they were surveilling the building. When I protested and asked for their badge number, they took me to jail. The gang database is a direct attack on our Black and Brown sons and daughters.
Time's expired. Thank you.
It must be, thank you. I'll put my rest in.
Next will be Sakina Trice.
Starting time.
Good afternoon. My name is Sakina Trice. I'm a senior staff attorney with the Disability Justice Program at the New York Lawyers for the Public Interest. Thank you for the opportunity to present my testimony today on the NYPD's use of stop-and-frisk and other investigative encounters. Police officers routinely arrest and involuntary transport to a hospital individuals in New York City who are experiencing or perceived to be experiencing mental health emergencies pursuant to NYPD's unlawful involuntary removal policies and practices, specifically Patrol Guide 22-13. 22-13 on its face and or as applied expands the NYPD's authority to remove people with mental disabilities and involuntarily transport them to psychiatric evaluation, even when probable cause for arrest is lacking. The guide needlessly heightens the risk of harm to people experiencing a mental health crisis and results in unlawful detentions and transport. The stated purpose of the patrol guide is to provide tactical operations, but it does not instruct police on how to respond to the healthcare needs of a person with mental health concerns who is the subject of a 911 call. And so unfortunately, the city's current attempt to offer a non-police program, the Behavioral Health Emergency Assistance Response Division program, does not meet the goal of actually offering a non-police response. And so, for example, in fiscal year 2024, more than 70% of all mental health calls in the Be Heard pilot areas were still directed to the NYPD. And so we are asking New York City to join other cities across the country to remove police entirely from the equation and ensure that healthcare workers respond to healthcare crisis. The city must establish a system whereby individuals who experience a mental health crisis receive appropriate services, which will de-escalate the crisis and which will ensure their well-being and the well-being of all other New Yorkers. And so we are asking the city to invest in a true non-police response model. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Tawana Guilford.
Starting time.
Hello, good afternoon. Is everyone able to hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Salam, and to the City Council Public Safety Committee. I appreciate the time. My name is Dr. Tawana Guilford, and I'm the licensed psychologist in New York State. I'm also the co-founder of the Universal Stop False Police Reporting Initiative. And I'll start with a very provocative statement by saying the Special Narcotics Prosecutor's Office is the place where accountability and transparency around stop and frisk goes to die. My reason for making such a bold assertion is based on my family experiences and the experiences of other individuals that have been convicted of a questionable stop and frisk that led to a drug conviction in a prosecutorial office. My brother, he was convicted and sentenced to 6.5 years for a drug crime that he had no participation in, one that did not exist. But because NYCHA has been deemed a high crime area, and because the PSAs work in tandem with the Special Narcotics Prosecutor's Office, there is very little oversight about how those handoffs work. And those were issues that came up during today's testimony. So we all know that the Special Narcotics Prosecutor is appointed by all 5 borough-based district attorneys. However, these attorneys have no jurisdiction over the Special Narcotics Prosecutor's Office and cannot reach in to take a second look at these questionable stop and frisk convictions. These convictions never receive the justice they deserve because there is no objectivity in the review process. And this is what I mean when I say the SNP's office is where justice goes to die. I'm speaking out in this manner, for my brother Tariq Guilford and for all of the other Tariq Guilfords in New York State. My call to action is for the Commission to create a provision that would allow each borough-based district attorney's conviction review units to be granted the ability to pull cases for review when officer credibility have been called into question. Us New Yorkers deserve
Time's
every
expired.
opportunity for
Thank
justice
you.
in this legal system.
I'd like to call Christopher Leon Johnson.
All right. Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Christopher Leon Johnson. Thank you, Chair Salam, for holding this hearing on this bad Monday. But I want to make this clear that we need to bring back Stop and Frisk. I support Stop and Frisk because I live in a high crime district, District 41, and it's a bad neighborhood. There's a lot of shooters that happen around here. And with Stop and Frisk, if we could stop people from on the street, we could catch a lot of these guns and knives, and maybe the crime will be mitigated like that. Because you never know, people are out to kill or maim somebody if they have a gun or a knife. Stop and Frisk is needed because of that. And another thing is, I know everybody want to eradicate the gang database, which was done by Reynoso. But the truth of the matter of fact about the gang database is that we can't abolish it right now because we have a criminal migrant segment in the city that is doing a lot of damage to the city, and Donald Trump is coming back. I'm not here to support a push a candidate, but Donald Trump is coming back, and ICE needs to know who these guys and gals are. It's easier for the NYPD and the federal government agencies to know who these guys and gals are. So you cannot eradicate the gang database. I understand that there's a lot of disparity with the gang database, but if this was about 3 years ago before this crisis and the situation with the migrant crisis, I understand that the gang database should have been abolished, but right now, you just can't do it. It's unrealistic. And back to Stop and Frisk, we need it because crime is high in a lot of these districts, especially in the hot, like my district, District 41, Mealy's district, District 55, 8055, Latrice Walker. We need it. I'm black, and I'm saying as a black man that we need to bring it back. We need to increase it more because with this, it can get a lot of guns off the street. It can get a lot of knives on the street. It can save a lot of lives. It can save a lot of times we get shot and killed by a straight bullet because guys keep on beefing and stuff like that. So I'm black. I totally support Stop and Frisk. I understand that these guys and gals out here today fight against it. I understand their pain, but this is a new time right now. This is
Time's expired. Thank you.
So thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I'd like to thank everybody for today's testimony. This hearing has been concluded.